Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Overpowered Naruto joined the Gotei 13 and fell in love with Rukia Kuchiki? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sage and the Soul Reaper. The air in the 78th district of the Rukin, Junrinan, was supposed to be still. It was a place of quiet desperation, where the scent of dust and the faint perfume of cherry blossoms from the distant seraite mingled into a scent of perpetual longing. But tonight, the air was not still. It was vibrating, humming with a cold, predatory energy that made the fine hairs on Rukia Kuchiki's arms stand on end. The spiritual particles themselves seemed to cringe away from it, creating a pocket of profound wrongness in the fabric of the world. "Report," Rukia commanded, her voice a sharp, cutting edge in the tense silence. She stood on the rooftop of a dilapidated tenement, the pristine white of her 13th Division lieutenant's armband a stark contrast to the grimy wood beneath her feet. "Lieutenant, the readings are off the scale," stammered Hidetomo, a young, earnest officer whose face was pale in the ghostly moonlight. He fumbled with a Keto-based scanner, its dials spinning erratically. "It's not just a single entity. The spiritual density, it's condensing. Rapidly, like nothing I've ever seen. Forget the scanner. Use your senses." She clipped back, her gaze fixed on the point in the sky where the world seemed to be tearing itself open. A jagged, black fissure, like a crack in obsidian, split the night. It wasn't a clean garganta, the familiar portal of a hollow. This was violent, raw, a wound bleeding chaotic energy into the soul society. From within that wound, a sound began to echo. It was not a single roar, but a symphony of them, 1,000 voices screaming in a unison of eternal agony. It was a sound that clawed at the sanity of any soul who heard it, a choir of the damned. "By the gods," Kato, her second in command, breathed beside her. His usual stoicism was fractured, his hand resting on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. That's impossible. So deep in the Rukin." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew the unspoken law. Lows of this magnitude could not, manifest this close to the seraite. The protective barriers, the constant patrols, the very spiritual pressure of the Gotei 13's captains made it a fortress. For a creature of this class to appear here was not just an anomaly, it was a declaration of war. The fissure widened, and the beast emerged. It was a Manos Grande, but to call it that felt like calling a tsunami a puddle. It was a Goliath of white bone and black cloth, its towering form blotting out the stars. A forest of mismatched limbs writhed from its body, and its mask was a collage of screaming faces, each one a trapped soul. Its ryutsu crashed down upon them like a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of pure, nihilistic hunger. The very air grew cold, and the ramshackle buildings of Junrinan groaned under the pressure. Rukia's training slammed into place, a rigid framework against the rising tide of primal fear. "All units, defensive formation. Hidetomo, send the distress signal to the seraite. Maximum priority. Kato, with me. We engage to delay, not to destroy. Buy time for the captains to arrive. That is our only objective." "Delay," Kato muttered, drawing his blade. "Lieutenant, that thing will devour this entire district in minutes. Then we will give it 1 minute," Rukia said, her own Zanpakuto, Soda no Shirayuki, appearing in her hand in a whisper of cold steel. The pure white ribbon on its hilt fluttered, a fragile thing in the face of such overwhelming power. She flashed forward, a blur of black and white. Bakudo number 61, Raikujokuro. 6 wide beams of yellow light shot from her fingers, slamming into the Manos' gargantuan leg. They were meant to be a prison of light, an unbreakable binder. They shattered like glass against its hide, dissipating into nothing. The creature didn't even seem to notice. Its massive head tilted down, a single, baleful red eye focusing on the insignificant gnat that had dared to attack it. The chorus of screams intensified, and a crimson light began to gather in its cavernous mouth. A Sero of this magnitude would not just erase them, it would obliterate a quarter of the Rukin district. "Scatter," Rukia yelled, already moving. The world turned red. A colossal beam of destructive energy tore through the night, incinerating everything in its path. Buildings, Streets, the very ground itself turned to superheated glass and then to dust. Rukia threw herself behind a crumbling wall, the force of the blast throwing her through it like a ragdoll. She landed hard, the impact jarring every bone in her body. Pain lanced up her side, and the taste of copper filled her mouth. She pushed herself up, her vision swimming. Kato was 100 yards away, helping a wounded Hidetomo. The rest of her squad was scattered, injured but alive. They had survived, but the Manos was already charging another Sero, the sound of its wailing souls reaching a fever pitch. They were out of time, out of options. Her mind raced through every Kido, every technique she knew. None of it would be enough. They were going to die here, and thousands of souls would die with them. A cold, bitter resignation began to settle in her heart. She gripped Soda no Shirayuki tighter. If this was her end, she would meet it as a Shinigami of the Gotei 13. And then, everything changed. A new presence washed over the battlefield. It was not the cold, sharp ryutsu of a Shinigami, nor the empty void of a hollow. This was something else entirely. It was warm, vibrant, and overwhelmingly powerful. It felt like the sun cresting the horizon after a long, dark night. It was an energy so saturated with life that it felt alien in this world of processed souls. It pushed back against the hollow's suffocating aura, not with force, but with sheer, undeniable presence. On the rooftop of the tallest remaining building, a figure stood. He was tall, dressed in a simple black shirt and trousers under a flowing, high-collared cloak emblazoned with crimson flames at the hem. His hair was a shock of brilliant gold, like spun sunlight, and his eyes were a startling, piercing blue. But it was the energy pouring off him in waves that held everyone transfixed. It was a golden aura, calm and controlled, but with an undercurrent of power so vast it felt like staring into the heart of a star. The Manos paused its attack, its single eye swiveling to face this new, blindingly bright threat. The screaming chorus of its being faltered, a hint of confusion entering the cacophony. The man in the golden aura looked down at the scene of devastation, his expression calm, analytical, yet tinged with a quiet sadness. His gaze swept over Rukia and her battered squad, then settled on the gargantuan hollow. He raised a hand. He didn't shout an incantation. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply brought his hands together, and the world seemed to hold its breath. A swirling sphere of brilliant blue energy, no larger than his palm, formed between them. It spun with impossible speed. And then, with a sound like 1,000 shrieking blades, 4 massive, razor-sharp points of wind erupted from it, creating a spinning vortex of pure, destructive power. It looked like a miniature shuriken made of a hurricane. Rukia could only stare, her Shinigami senses screaming at her. The energy contained within that small sphere was denser and more potent than the Manos' entire Sero. It wasn't just raw power, it was perfectly, impossibly controlled. The man didn't throw it. He pushed it forward, and it expanded, flying through the air with a deafening, RCing scream that tore at the very air itself. It moved with such velocity that it left a vacuum in its wake. The Manos, sensing the absolute threat, fired its Sero. The colossal red beam met the spinning vortex of wind. There was no grand explosion. No cataclysmic struggle for dominance. The Golden Man's technique simply consumed the Sero. It shredded the beam of energy into nothingness and continued on its path, unabated. It struck the Manos Grande square in its chest. For a single, silent moment, nothing happened. Then, a network of microscopic black lines spread across the hollow's body, originating from the point of impact. The shrieking of the spinning vortex reached an impossible, universe-ending pitch. And the Manos Grande disintegrated. It did not explode. It did not burn. It was unmade. One moment, a mountain of bone and soul stood there, and the next, there was only empty air and the fading echo of a shriek. The entire being, down to the last spiritual particle, had been utterly and completely annihilated. Silence descended, a profound, ringing silence that was more shocking than the battle itself. The oppressive, cold ryutsu of the hollow was gone, replaced by the warm, sun-like aura of the stranger, which now gently subsided, his golden glow fading to leave just the man. He floated down from the rooftop, landing silently on the cratered street. He looked at the vast trench of molten earth left by the Sero, his brow furrowed. He then turned to Rukia, his blue eyes holding a startling degree of empathy. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm and even. Rukia couldn't find her voice. She stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Who was he? What was that power? He wasn't a Shinigami. He had no Zanpakuto, no standard uniform. He wasn't a Quincy. His power felt nothing like theirs. He wasn't a hollow. He was something entirely new, a variable that the Soul Society's millennia of experience had no context for. Before she could answer, the heiress hammered with the telltale sign of Shunpo. A dozen figures in the stark white uniforms and face-concealing masks of the Onmitsukido materialized around them, their blades drawn and leveled at the stranger. They were led by a tall man with sharp, severe features and the insignia of the 2nd Division's captain on his haori. Captain Soma Kasaragi, Commander-in-Chief of the Onmitsukido. "Do not move," Soma commanded. His voice as cold and sharp as the blade he pointed at the golden-haired man's throat. "Identify yourself. By what authority do you operate within the Rukan district?" The stranger didn't even look at the blade. He kept his gaze on Rukia, a silent question in his eyes. He seemed utterly unconcerned by the ring of elite assassins surrounding him. "I don't have an authority," he said simply, turning his attention to Soma. "I saw people in trouble, and I helped." "Helped?" Soma scoffed. "You just unleashed a technique of catastrophic power unregistered by the Department of Research and Development. You are an unknown entity of immense spiritual pressure. You are not a variable we can afford to leave unchecked. Surrender for interrogation, or we will subdue you by force." The stranger sighed, a sound of weary patience. He slowly raised his hands in a placating gesture. "There's no need for that. I'll go with you, but you should probably see to the injured first." Soma's eyes narrowed, but he gave a curt nod to one of his subordinates, who flashed away to coordinate the relief efforts. The captain never took his eyes off the stranger. The tension was thick enough to cut with a blade. Rukia finally found her footing, her mind clearing enough to reassert her duty. She stepped forward, Soda no Shirayuki still in hand. "Captain Kasaragi, I am Lieutenant Rukia Kuchiki of the 13th Division. This man, he saved my squad and this entire district. The Manos was beyond our capabilities. Your report will be noted, Lieutenant," Soma said dismissively. "But saving a district does not grant one immunity for wielding unclassified, destructive power. His very existence is a threat to the balance." He gestured with his blade. "Now, come with us." The stranger gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "All right, my name is Naruto Uzumaki." The walk through the Seraite was a silent, tense affair. Naruto was flanked by Onmitsukido guards, his hands bound in Kido cuffs that were supposed to suppress spiritual power. Rukia noted with a growing sense of disbelief that the cuffs seemed to have no effect on him whatsoever. The warm, vibrant energy still rolled off him in gentle waves. A stark contrast to the sterile, orderly atmosphere of the Shinigami's fortress city. News traveled fast. By the time they reached the towering 1st Division barracks, whispers and stares followed them. Shinigami of all ranks paused their duties to get a look at the man who had supposedly vaporized a Manos Grande with a single, unknown technique. They were ushered into the main assembly hall, a vast, solemn chamber whose walls had borne witness to 1,000 years of history. Standing in two opposing lines were the captains of the Gotei 13. Their combined spiritual pressure was an ocean of power, enough to bring any normal soul to its knees. Rukia instinctively lowered her head in deference. Naruto, however, simply stood there, his gaze sweeping over the assembly with a calm curiosity. He met the eyes of each captain, from the wild, grinning visage of Kenpachi Zaraki to the cold, aristocratic indifference of her own brother, Rukia Kuchiki. The captains, in turn, scrutinized him, their expressions ranging from intrigue to outright hostility. At the far end of the hall, seated on a simple wooden throne, was the ancient, wizened form of head captain Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. His eyes, usually closed in contemplation, were open and sharp, burning with the wisdom and power of a millennium. "Report, Captain Kasaragi," Yamamoto's voice boomed, deep and resonant. "Head Captain," Soma began, kneeling. "We responded to a priority distress signal from the 78th District. Upon arrival, we found evidence of a battle with a Manos-class hollow of unprecedented scale. The entity had been eliminated. Lieutenant Kuchiki and her squad identified this individual, Naruto Uzumaki, as the one responsible. Yamamoto's gaze fell upon Naruto. An individual of unknown origin, wielding a power we cannot identify. Appears within our borders and annihilates a threat that would have required multiple captains to subdue. A curious development. He is a threat, interjected a sharp, clear voice. It belonged to Captain Kenshin Araki of the 8th Division, a young, handsome man known for his prodigious talent and his staunch traditionalism. His ryutsu is foreign, chaotic. It has no place here. He violated every protocol, acting as a vigilante. He must be detained, his power sealed, until we can ascertain his motives. A lazy drawl came from across the hall. Oh, I don't know. Sounds exciting to me. Captain Shunsui Kiraku tipped his straw hat back, a playful smile on his lips. Anyone who can clean up a mess that big, that fast, might be worth talking to before we lock him away, don't you think? Talk. A guttural voice growled. Captain Kenpachi Zaraki grinned, his scarred face alight with bloodlust. Forget talking. I want to fight him. See if he's as strong as he feels. Rukia's brother, Byakuya, spoke for the first time, his voice like the chime of ice. His power is irrelevant. His presence is a disruption to order. He appeared near my sister's squad. His involvement with a noble of the Kuchiki clan requires thorough investigation. His cold eyes flickered to Rukia, and she felt a familiar chill. Naruto had remained silent through it all, simply listening. Now, he spoke, his voice cutting through the captain's debate. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he repeated, his tone respectful but firm. I am not from this world. Where I come from, we are called shinobi. I came here through a passage that opened after a great war. I was not seeking conflict. I am simply trying to understand this place. Captain Mayuri Kuritsuchi, his face painted in a ghoulish mask, giggled with a disturbing scientific glee. Not from this world, you say. Fascinating. A specimen from another dimension. Head captain, I must insist he be turned over to the Research and Development Institute. The things I could learn by dissecting him. That's enough, Mayuri, Captain Yukitaki of the 13th Division said kindly, though his words held a quiet authority. He turned his gentle gaze to Naruto. You say you wish to understand our world. Yet your first act was one of immense destruction. The hollow was going to kill them, Naruto said, his eyes finding Rukia's for a moment. It was going to destroy everything around it. I acted to protect them. The technique I used was precise. It only destroyed the target. Captain Kenshin scoffed. Precise. We have reports of an entire section of the district being obliterated. That is not precision, that is brute force. That was from the hollow's Sero, Naruto corrected him calmly. I destroyed the creature. It destroyed the city. There's a difference. His directness, his utter lack of fear or deference in the face of the most powerful beings in the Soul Society, was astonishing. He spoke to them not as a prisoner, but as an equal. Yamamoto stroked his long, white beard, his ancient eyes boring into Naruto. You speak of another world, of a great war. You possess power that dwarfs that of a seated officer, perhaps even a lieutenant. Why should we believe you are not a scout for an invading army? Naruto met his gaze without flinching. Because I am tired of war. My world is finally at peace. I have no army. There is only me. He paused, and for a moment, the captains felt the air in the room grow heavy. The warm, sun-like energy that emanated from Naruto swelled, not in a threatening way, but in a display of sheer, unfathomable depth. It was like feeling the gravitational pull of a planet. It was controlled, contained, but it promised a power that could crack the very heavens. This, Naruto said, his voice quiet but echoing in the now silent hall, is my power. I can use it to build, or I can use it to destroy. I would prefer not to do the latter ever again. I am not your enemy. The pressure subsided as quickly as it came. The captains were silent, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and renewed suspicion. Kenpachi was vibrating with excitement. Byakuya's hand was resting on the hilt of Senbon Sakura. Yamamoto closed his eyes for a long moment. The fate of this strange, impossibly powerful man hung in the balance. When he opened them again, his decision was made. Your story is improbable, the head captain declared. But your power is undeniable. To treat you as a common prisoner would be foolish. To let you roam free would be reckless. Therefore, a compromise is in order. He pointed a gnarled finger at Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, you will be placed under the direct observation of the Gotei 13. You will be assigned to a division where your actions can be monitored, and your nature can be assessed. You will reside within the Seraite and will answer to its laws. He then turned his gaze to a shocked Jashiro Yukitaki. You will be assigned to the 13th Division, under the command of Captain Yukitaki. Yukitaki blinked, but then a small, welcoming smile graced his lips. Of course, Head Captain. We would be honored. One more condition, Yamamoto added, his eyes now falling on Rukia, making her heart freeze. Lieutenant Rukia Kuchiki, you were the first to make contact with him. You have witnessed his power firsthand. You will be personally responsible for his orientation. You will be his guide. You will watch him, you will report on him, and you will ensure he does not deviate from our laws. Do you understand? Rukia's mind went blank. Her, responsible for this force of nature. She felt her brother's piercing gaze from across the hall. This was a test, a burden, an honor. She didn't know. Swallowing hard, she dropped to one knee. Yes, Head Captain, I understand. Good, Yamamoto said. Captain Kasaragi, release him. Soma looked as if he wanted to protest, but a single look from Yamamoto silenced him. With a flick of his wrist, the Kido cuffs on Naruto's wrists dissolved. Naruto simply rubbed his wrists, his expression unreadable. Before the meeting was dismissed, Naruto spoke one last time. There was one more thing, he said, his voice drawing the attention of every captain. When the portal opened, and the hollow came through, the energy was wrong. It was tainted, corrupted, like something was forcing its way into your world, using the hollow as a key. Captain Kenshin waved a dismissive hand. Irregular manifestations often have residual energy signatures. It's meaningless. Mayuri, however, looked intrigued. Tainted, you say? How so? It felt old, Naruto said. His eyes distant, as if recalling a sensation he hadn't felt in a very long time. And deliberate. Yamamoto considered this for a moment. Your observation is noted. For now, your priority is to acclimate. Lieutenant Kuchiki, escort him to the 13th Division barracks. Dismissed. The captains began to file out, casting backward glances at Naruto. Kenpachi gave him a wide, promising grin. Byakuya walked past Rukia without a word, but the message in his eyes was clear: do not fail. Soon, only Rukia, Yukitaki, and Naruto remained in the vast hall. Yukitaki walked over, his kind face showing a genuine warmth. Welcome to the 13th Division, Naruto Uzumaki. I hope you'll find us to your liking. Rukia is one of my finest officers. You'll be in good hands. Thank you, Naruto said, giving a small bow of his head. It was a gesture of respect, not subservience. Rukia, Yukitaki said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Show him to the guest quarters. Get him settled in, and try to answer any questions he has. Yes, Captain, she said, her voice tight. Yukitaki gave them both one last smile before leaving them alone in the cavernous room. An awkward silence fell between them. Rukia stood stiffly, unsure of what to say or do. He was her responsibility now. This man who could unmake monsters with a flick of his wrist. He broke the silence. So, he said, a small, wry smile touching his lips. Which way to the barracks? Rukia looked up at him, at the strange, kind intelligence in his blue eyes. He was an enigma, a puzzle wrapped in a supernova. He was her charge, her problem. And quite possibly the most dangerous being she had ever met. Follow me, she said, her voice barely a whisper, and turned to lead him out of the hall. As they walked through the quiet evening streets of the Seraite, under the watchful gaze of the moon, Rukia couldn't shake the feeling that Naruto Uzumaki's arrival was not just an incident. It was the beginning of something profound. A tremor that would shake the very foundations of the Soul Society. And she was standing at the epicenter. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Place Among Gods. The first morning Naruto Uzumaki spent in the Seraite. He woke to the sound of a perfectly manicured world. There were no birds chirping, only the distant, rhythmic thwack of a bakan against a training post and the soft, epping whispers of brooms on stone pathways. The air that drifted through the open shoji screen of his guest quarters was clean, sterile, and carried the faint, electric tang of dense spiritual energy. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant, chaotic symphony of life he was used to. Konoha woke with a roar of commerce, chatter, and the scent of ramen and morning dew. This place woke with the silent, disciplined hum of a 1,000-year-old military institution. He sat up, stretching the kinks from his back. The room was sparse and elegant. A simple futon on a tatami mat, a low wooden table, and an ink wash painting of a crane on the wall. It was peaceful. It was also a cage, albeit a very pretty one. He could feel the eyes on him, not just physical, but the countless spiritual senses of the Shinigami in the 13th Division barracks. They were watching, waiting, trying to measure the anomaly that now slept in their midst. He swung his legs off the futon and stood, moving through a series of slow, deliberate stretches. He wasn't wearing the black cloak from the night before, just the simple black shirt and trousers. Without the cloak, he looked less like an otherworldly force and more like a young man. Though the sheer breadth of his shoulders and the coiled power in his posture belied any sense of normalcy. He could feel the flow of natural energy in the Soul Society. It was different here, thinner, more refined. But it was present. He drew a small amount into his body, the familiar warmth spreading through him, sharpening his senses. The whispers of the Shinigami outside became clear as day. Saw him with my own eyes. The whole district. Just gone. But he vaporized the Manos. Lieutenant Kuchiki confirmed it. That's what's so terrifying. What kind of power does that? Is he a man? Or some kind of god? He's the lieutenant's problem. That's what he is. Poor her. Naruto sighed. It was the same story, different world. The whispers, the fear, the awe. He was used to it. He walked to the door, slid it open, and stepped out into the morning light. The courtyard of the 13th Division was a scene of controlled activity. Shinigami moved with purpose, their black Shihakusho uniforms immaculate. The moment he appeared, a hush fell over the area. All activity ceased. Dozens of pairs of eyes fixed on him. Rukia was standing nearby, speaking with two of her senior officers, Sentaro Katsubuki and Kion Kotetsu. She saw him and her back immediately stiffened, her expression becoming a carefully constructed mask of professional detachment. Uzumaki, she said, her voice formal. You're awake. I trust the quarters were satisfactory. They were fine. Thanks, Naruto said, offering a small, disarming smile that didn't quite seem to land. He glanced at her two subordinates, who were staring at him with a comical mixture of fear and bravado. Morning. Sentaro, a large man with a brash demeanor, puffed out his chest. So you're the guy. You don't look so tough. Kion elbowed him sharply in the ribs. Show some respect. This is the man who saved the lieutenant, she hissed, before turning to Naruto with a star-struck look. It's an honor. Thank you for protecting our lieutenant. Sentaro. Kion. That's enough, Rukia snapped, a faint blush on her cheeks. She turned back to Naruto. Captain Yukitake has requested your presence in the main hall once you've eaten. I will escort you. Sounds good, Naruto said, his gaze drifting towards the training grounds where several Shinigami were sparring. Mind if I watch for a bit first? Rukia hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep him contained, away from the rank and file. But her orders were to observe and orient him, and that meant letting him interact with this world. Very well, but do not cause any trouble. Wouldn't dream of it, he said, his smile a little more genuine this time. He wandered over to the edge of the dojo, his presence acting like a magnet. The sparring pairs faltered, their attention drawn to him. He ignored the stares, his focus entirely on their movements. He watched them practice zanjutsu, the art of the sword. Their forms were precise, economical, deadly. It was different from the kenjutsu of the samurai he knew. More fluid, more reliant on their superhuman speed and strength. After a few minutes, a tall, powerfully built Shinigami with the rank of third seat, a man named Guro, swaggered over. He was a veteran, his face a roadmap of old scars, and his eyes held the confident arrogance of a man who'd won 1,000 fights. Enjoying the show, outsider? Guro asked, his voice a low rumble. I'm learning, Naruto replied honestly. Your sword style is impressive. Guro smirked. It's more than a style. It's the soul of a Shinigami. Something a man with no Zanpakuto wouldn't understand. He gestured with his chin towards the training circle. You use your fists, I hear. All brute force. Why don't you step in? Show us what you've got when you're not blowing up monsters. A murmur went through the assembled crowd. This was what they had all been waiting for. A chance to see the man behind the legend, to test his mettle. Rukia started forward. Third seat Goro, stand down. He is not to be antagonized. Quote. Naruto held up a hand, stopping her. He looked at Goro, his blue eyes calm. I don't want to hurt anyone. Goro laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Hurt me, kid. I've been fighting hollows since before your parents were born. I just want a friendly spar. No Kido, no special tricks. Just your hands against my blade. Unless you're afraid. It was a classic alpha male challenge. A playground taunt backed by real steel. Naruto had faced it 100 times before. He knew refusing would be seen as weakness, and accepting could lead to escalation. He chose a third option. All right, he said, stepping into the circle. He carried a simple, unadorned sword at his waist, a gift from the land of iron he'd brought with him, but he didn't touch it. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed. Just one condition. We stop when I say we stop. Goro's smirk widened. You got it. He drew his Zanpakuto, its polished blade gleaming in the morning sun. He didn't release its shikai. This was a matter of pure martial pride. He settled into a classic kendo stance, his spiritual pressure flaring, a sharp, cutting presence. Naruto didn't change his stance. He just stood there, hands at his sides, breathing evenly. To the onlookers, he looked completely vulnerable. Rukia watched, her heart pounding. She had seen his destructive power, but this was different. This was a test of skill, of discipline. Goro charged. He was deceptively fast, crossing the 10 yards between them in a blink. His blade came down in a vicious overhead slash meant to cleave a man in two. Naruto moved. It wasn't a flash step. It was something smoother, more fluid. He swayed to the side, the blade missing him by a hair's breadth. His movement was so minimal, so impossibly efficient, that it looked like Goro had simply missed. Before the third seat could recover, Naruto's hand shot out, not in a fist, but with his fingers open. He tapped Goro's sword arm at the wrist and elbow simultaneously. A jolt of something. Not electricity, not Raryoku, just perfectly applied kinetic force, shot through Goro's arm. His fingers went numb, and his Zanpakuto clattered to the ground. He stared at his hand, then at Naruto. His arrogant smirk replaced by sheer, dumbfounded shock. The entire exchange had taken less than a second. Naruto took a half step back, his posture once again relaxed. We stop. Silence. The entire courtyard was frozen. No one had even seen exactly what happened. One moment, Goro was attacking with killing intent, and the next, he was disarmed, completely unharmed but utterly defeated. Naruto hadn't even broken a sweat. He hadn't used a flashy technique or an ounce of his overwhelming power. He had used pure, transcendent skill. He bent down, picked up Goro's sword, and offered it back to him, hilt first. You're fast, Naruto said, his voice genuine. If I hadn't been watching your shoulder, you would have gotten me. Goro stared at the offered blade, then at Naruto's face. The arrogance in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning, grudging respect. He took the sword, his hand trembling slightly, and gave a stiff, formal bow. Thank you for the lesson. Nah. Naruto just nodded and walked out of the circle. The crowd of Shinigami parted for him, their expressions a mix of awe and renewed fear. He had shown them something more terrifying than raw power, perfect control. He rejoined Rukia, whose own face was a mask of astonishment. What was that? She whispered. Taijutsu, he said simply. Hand-to-hand combat. It's about using your opponent's momentum against them. It's less messy than blowing things up. Before she could question him further, a new voice, sharp and melodious, cut through the courtyard air. An impressive display of savage efficiency. Everyone turned. Standing at the entrance to the barracks was a captain. He wore the standard Haori, but his was immaculately clean, the number 8 emblazoned on its back. He was young, with sharp, aristocratic features, and dark hair that was perfectly styled. His eyes, a cool shade of violet, held an intelligent, appraising light. This was Captain Kenshin Araki of the 8th Division. He was a prodigy, the youngest Shinigami to achieve Bankai in a century, and a staunch defender of Gotei 13 tradition. He walked towards them, his presence commanding immediate deference. Every Shinigami in the courtyard, including Rukia, bowed deeply. Naruto alone remained standing, simply turning to face the newcomer with a neutral expression. Kenshin's eyes narrowed slightly at the perceived lack of respect. "You must be Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice smooth but with an underlying edge of steel. "The talk of the Seraite. I am Kenshin Araki, captain of the 8th Division." "A pleasure," Naruto said, his tone even. "I came to see the beast in its new cage," Kenshin continued, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. "I must admit, your control is greater than the rumors suggested." "Why? Oh, you managed to defeat a 3rd seat without leveling the barracks. A commendable feat of restraint." The insult was clear, wrapped in the silk of a compliment. Naruto's expression didn't change. "I was invited to spar. I accepted." "Indeed," Kenshin said, circling him slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "But what you do is not sparring. It is not the art of the Gotei 13. It is the unrefined brawling of an outsider. You have immense power, no one denies this. But power without principle, without tradition, is a danger to the very order we have sworn to protect. It is a cancer." Rukia bristled. "Captain Araki, with all due respect, he is a guest of the 13th Division under the head captain's orders." Kenshin held up a hand, silencing her without looking at her. His focus was entirely on Naruto. "Your presence has created a schism, Uzumaki. Some see you as a savior. Others, like myself, see you as an omen. A variable that threatens the balance of our world. Your strange, warm Ryutsu. It feels like a contamination in the pure spiritual environment of the Soul Society." "I'm just trying to learn my way around," Naruto said, his patience beginning to wear thin. "And we are trying to learn what, precisely, you are," Kenshin countered. "Therefore, I have come to make a formal proposal. A public exhibition, a duel between you and me, to be held this afternoon in the Central Training Grounds. It will be an opportunity for you to demonstrate the full scope of your abilities in a controlled environment, and for us," he gestured to the assembled Shinigami, "to properly assess the nature of the power we are now housing in our midst." Rukia's blood ran cold. A duel with a captain. With Kenshin Araki. He was a master of Kido, his Zanpakuto fabled for its complexity and deadliness. This wasn't a proposal, it was a death sentence disguised as a formality. It was a political move, designed to publicly humiliate and subdue the outsider. "He is not obligated to accept," Rukia said quickly. "His status is that of an observer, not a combatant." "Oh, but I think he is," Kenshin said, his violet eyes locking with Naruto's blue ones. "Unless he wishes for the whispers to continue. The fear, the suspicion, this is his chance to silence them. To prove he is either a friend to be welcomed, or a foe to be vanquished. What do you say, Naruto Uzumaki? Are you merely a wild animal who can crush the weak? Or do you have the courage to face a true Shinigami captain?" The entire courtyard held its breath. Naruto stood silent for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't looking at Kenshin with anger, but with a deep, analytical focus. He was reading the man, his motives, his pride. He understood what this was. A power play, an attempt to put him in his place. He also knew that refusing would only validate Kenshin's claims and make his life here impossible. He finally gave a slow nod. "This afternoon, I'll be there." Kenshin's smile was one of triumph. "Excellent. I look forward to a spirited demonstration." He turned, his howry swirling around him, and walked away, his point made and his trap set. As soon as he was gone, Rukia rounded on Naruto, her voice a furious whisper. "Are you insane? That's Kenshin Araki. He's not some 3rd seat looking for a brawl. He's a master strategist. His Shikai is said to be inescapable. He's trying to execute you under the guise of a duel." "I know," Naruto said calmly. "Then why did you accept?" she demanded, exasperated. "Because he's right about one thing," Naruto said, his eyes scanning the faces of the other Shinigami, who we now looking at him with a mixture of terror and morbid excitement. "The whispers won't stop until I face them head on. He thinks I'm just a destructive monster. I need to show him, and everyone else, that they're wrong." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the immense weight behind his calm demeanor. It was the look of a man who had carried the fate of a world on his shoulders, a man for whom a political duel was a minor inconvenience. "Don't worry, Rukia," he said, her name sounding natural on his lips for the first time. I don't plan on losing. Or on destroying anything. The central training ground was a massive, open-air arena, large enough to contain the bankai of several captains. By mid-afternoon, the viewing platforms were crowded. News of the duel had spread like wildfire. It seemed half the Seraite was there. Captains Yamamoto, Hiiraku, Yukitake, Kenpachi, and Byakuya were all present, their expressions varying from solemn to amused to utterly indifferent. Rukia stood beside her captain. Her hands clenched into fists. He's being foolish, Captain. Arrogant. Yukitake watched the arena floor with his gentle, knowing eyes. Is he being strategic? Think, Rukia. Captain Araki has framed this as a test of Naruto's character. By accepting, Naruto has seized control of the narrative. Now, the question isn't whether he's a monster, but how he chooses to wield his monstrous power. Down below, Naruto stood on one side of the vast expanse, Kenshin on the other. Kenshin was the picture of Shinigami perfection, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. Naruto stood just as he had in the morning, relaxed and empty-handed, his own blade still sheathed at his waist. Head Captain Yamamoto's voice echoed across the arena, acting as the official arbiter. This is an exhibition match to assess the capabilities of the individual, Naruto Uzumaki. The duel will conclude upon the surrender or incapacitation of either participant. Lethal force is forbidden. Begin. Kenshin didn't waste a moment. Hado number 58, Tenrin. A powerful, tornado-like blast of wind shot from his outstretched hand, aimed not at Naruto, but at the ground in front of him, kicking up a massive cloud of dust to obscure his vision. It was a classic opening move, designed to disorient and create an opening. From within the cloud, Kenshin's voice chanted, cold and precise. Bakudo number 61, Raikujokuro. 6 beams of light erupted from the dust cloud, converging on Naruto's position. But Naruto wasn't there. He had taken a single, casual side step, moving out of the spell's path before it had even fully formed. Kenshin emerged from the dust, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Impressive reflexes. He raised his hand again. Hado number 33. Sokatsui. A massive torrent of blue spiritual energy blasted towards Naruto. Naruto didn't dodge this time. He simply raised his hand and caught it. The entire arena gasped. He didn't block it or deflect it. He caught the blast in his open palm. The raging blue energy swirled around his hand, struggling against his grip like a living thing, before he clenched his fist and it simply dissipated. Snuffed out like a candle flame. Kenshin's composure finally cracked. How? Your energy is unfocused, Naruto said, his voice carrying easily across the field. You're throwing it, but you're not controlling it. Kenshin's jaw tightened, his pride stung. Unfocused. I am a master of Kido. You are an ignorant brute who knows nothing of its artistry. He raised his Zanpakuto, pointing the tip at Naruto. You have forced my hand. You will now witness true power and precision. Cower before the celestial canvas. Tenkyu no feud. His spiritual pressure exploded outwards, refined and immense. The blade of his sword dissolved into shimmering, ink-black light, which coalesced around his hand to form a beautiful, ethereal calligraphy brush. The air around him crackled with Kido energy. That is his Shikai, Yukitake murmured beside Rukia. Brush of the celestial sphere. Any Kido spell he paints into the air with it manifests instantly, without incantation, and with far greater power. On the field, Kenshin began to move, his feet gliding over the ground as if he were dancing. The brush in his hand was a blur, painting complex kanji in the air with strokes of black light. Byakurai, a bolt of white lightning, thick as a man's arm, shot from a painted symbol. Naruto swayed, the bolt searing the air where his head had been. Shakuho. Kenshin painted again, and a massive fireball erupted from another symbol, roaring towards Naruto. Hainawa. An energy rope snaked out from a third, trying to ensnare his ankles. It was a dazzling, deadly display. Kenshin was unleashing a relentless barrage of high-level Kido from all directions. Each spell perfectly formed and instantly cast. He was turning the entire arena into a kill box, forcing Naruto onto the defensive. But Naruto was flowing. He moved with an uncanny grace, an economy of motion that was breathtaking. He never took more than a single step to evade a spell. He would lean back just enough for a lightning bolt to pass, duck just as a fireball would have taken his head off. Lift his foot a mere inch to avoid the glowing rope. Rukia stared, mesmerized. It wasn't just speed. He was anticipating the attacks. He was moving before Kenshin had even finished painting the spells. How is he doing that? She breathed. High on the platform, Rukia Kuchiki watched with narrowed eyes, his usual indifference replaced by a sharp, analytical focus. He is not reacting. He is predicting. Naruto's eyes had changed. His pupils had become horizontal, like a toad's, and faint orange markings had appeared around his eyes. He had entered sage mode. He wasn't just watching Kenshin, he was feeling him. He could sense the flow of Raryoku in Kenshin's body, the intent forming in his mind, the way the spiritual particles in the air itself shifted to accommodate the coming spell. To him, Kenshin's instant attacks were unfolding in slow motion. From an impossible, hidden vantage point, in a dimension layered between the seams of the Soul Society, two figures watched the duel unfold on a shimmering pane of distorted reality. The anomaly is more potent than we calculated, one said, its voice a chorus of whispers. He is interfacing with the world's life force. An ancient, crude art. The Shinigami, Kenshin Araki, is also of note, the second voice hissed. His pride and his belief in order make him rigid. A tool that could easily be broken, or reforged. Mark them both. The sage and the zealot. They will be pivotal. Back in the arena, Kenshin was growing desperate. He had thrown dozens of spells at Naruto, and not a single one had landed. The outsider was making a mockery of his lauded genius. And in front of the entire Gotei 13. Sweat beaded on his brow. The calm, composed captain was gone, replaced by a frustrated warrior. Stand still and fight me. He roared, painting a massive, complex symbol in the air. This is the end. Bakudo number 81. Danku. A colossal, transparent wall of energy materialized in front of him, a perfect, absolute defense. Behind it, he began painting his most powerful offensive spell. A forbidden Kido, a technique that would surely incapacitate Naruto and end this humiliation. Naruto watched him, a sigh escaping his lips. This had gone on long enough. He lowered his stance slightly, and for the first time, the warm, sun-like energy around him flared. But mixed within it, for a fleeting instant, was something else. Something ancient, primal, and overwhelmingly powerful. A flicker of blood-red chakra, so potent and wild it felt like the roar of a caged god. On the platforms, the captain stiffened. Kenpachi grinned, feeling the raw, delicious killing intent. Byakuya's hand went to his hilt. Shunsui's playful smile vanished. Kenshin felt it too. He faltered in his painting, a primal fear shooting up his spine. That flicker of energy, it was malevolent. Chaotic, the very thing he had feared. He had been right. Beneath the calm exterior was a monster. In that moment of hesitation, Naruto moved. He didn't use a flash step. He vanished. One moment he was 30 yards away, the next he was standing directly in front of Kenshin's Danku barrier. He drew his fist back. He didn't coat it in chakra. He didn't gather any spectacular energy. He just threw a simple, perfect punch. His fist connected with the absolute defense. There was no sound, but a single, spider-webbing crack appeared on the transparent wall. The crack spread, and with a soft tinkle, the Danku shattered into a million glittering shards of light. Kenshin stared in absolute horror. Nothing could break a Danku. Nothing. Naruto stepped through the dissipating shards. He didn't strike Kenshin. He didn't deliver a final, crushing blow. He simply walked past him, his hand reaching out to gently pluck the light brush from Kenshin's stunned grip. The Shikai dissolved, the brush reverting to its sealed katana form in Naruto's hand. He stopped, standing behind Kenshin, holding the captain's own Zanpakuto. The duel was over. He had won without landing a single blow. Without drawing his own weapon. He had shown not just power, but absolute, humiliating dominance and precision. Naruto turned and held the sword out to Kenshin. "It's a beautiful power," he said, his voice devoid of any mockery. "But you rely on it too much. You forgot to watch my hands." Kenshin stood frozen for a long moment, his back to Naruto. The silence in the arena was deafening. Then, with a strangled cry of rage and shame, he spun around, snatching his sword from Naruto's hand. He looked as if he might attack again, but he saw the look in Naruto's eyes. It wasn't pity, it was understanding, and that was somehow worse. Kenshin turned away and, without a word, flashed away from the arena, unable to bear the stares of his peers. Yamamoto's voice broke the silence. This exhibition is concluded. The victor is Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto gave a slight bow towards the head captain and then, ignoring the stunned silence and the erupting murmurs of the crowd, he simply turned and walked out of the arena. He wasn't looking for applause or recognition. He had done what he needed to do. Later that evening, the moon cast long shadows across the 13th Division's quiet gardens. Rukia found Naruto sitting on the edge of the Ingawa overlooking a small koi pond, a sketchbook and a piece of charcoal in his hands. The intense, godlike warrior from the arena was gone, replaced by a young man who seemed lost in thought. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle him. "What are you doing?" He glanced up, his expression softening when he saw her. "Trying to draw." He held up the sketchbook. On the page was a collection of scribbles. One was a stick figure with a huge, wild grin and spiky hair that was clearly meant to be Kenpachi. Another was a blob with glasses that she assumed was Mayuri. And in the center was a small, angry-looking stick figure with impressively rendered eyebrows. It was her. Despite the tension of the day, a small laugh escaped her lips. "Is that supposed to be me? My eyebrows aren't that big. They are when you're scowling," he teased gently, a real smile finally reaching his eyes. "Which you do a lot." She sat down beside him, a comfortable distance away, and looked out at the pond. "You were incredible today." The words came out before she could stop them. "I've never seen anyone move like that. Or do what you did to Captain Araki's Danku. It's just knowing where to hit things," he said, shrugging. "Everything has a weak point. You humiliated him," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to," Naruto replied, his smile fading. "I just needed to end it. He sees me as a threat to his world, to his idea of order. I get it. I was an outsider my whole life. People feared me for a power I didn't ask for." His words struck a chord deep within her. The pressure of the Kuchiki name, the constant struggle to prove herself, the weight of her brother's expectations, it was a different kind of cage, but a cage nonetheless. For the first time, she saw him not as a walking natural disaster, but as someone who might, in some small way, understand. "Why did you come here?" she asked, the question genuine. "To our world." He looked up at the moon, which was just as pale and distant here as it was in his own world. "My work was done. The wars were over, the world was at peace. My friends were all moving on, starting families, finding their own way. And I was left over. I had all this power, but no great enemy to fight. No great cause left to champion. I was just there. When the path opened, I thought maybe I could find a new purpose. Something besides just being the strongest." He turned to her, his blue eyes searching hers. "What about you? Is this what you always wanted? To be a Shinigami, to carry the weight of that name?" Rukia was taken aback by the directness of the question. No one ever asked her what she wanted. It was always about her duty to the clan, to the Gotei 13. "It is my duty," she said, the answer automatic. "And my honor." "That's not what I asked," he said softly. She looked away, at her own reflection in the dark water of the pond. "I don't know," she admitted, the words feeling foreign and freeing at the same time. "I've never thought about it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the gentle splash of the koi. It was a comfortable silence now, not an awkward one. All of suspicion and duty between them had begun to crumble, replaced by the first, tentative foundation of something else. "Understanding. You know," Naruto said, breaking the quiet, for an angry stick figure. "You're not so bad to talk to, Rukia Kuchiki." She looked at him, and despite herself, she smiled. A real, genuine smile. "And for a godlike being who can't draw, you're not as brutish as I expected, Naruto Uzumaki." It was a small moment, a simple conversation in a moonlit garden. But in the grand, tumultuous story of his arrival, it was the first sentence of a brand new chapter. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Echoes of Nobility. The summons did not arrive with the clamor of a messenger or the urgency of a hell butterfly. It came on a single, perfect sheet of rice paper, delivered by a silent servant of the Kuchiki clan whose face was a blank mask of impeccable servitude. The calligraphy was flawless, each stroke a testament to 1,000 years of breeding and discipline. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. You will present yourself at the Kuchiki manor at the 4th bell. Rukia held the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Her knuckles were white. This is not good, she stated. The words clipped and sharp in the morning air of the 13th Division's courtyard. My brother does not grant audiences. He holds court. He interrogates. Naruto glanced up from the simple bowl of rice he was eating. He'd found a quiet spot on the barracks steps, enjoying the relative peace before the day's duties began. He looked at the summons, then back at her tense, worried face. It's just a meeting. With you. Nothing is. Just a meeting, she retorted, pacing back and forth. You publicly defeated a captain. You shattered a Denku with your bare fist. The great clans, they see you as a typhoon in a teacup. A force that could upset generations of established power. And my brother is the living embodiment of that power. He is the law. He is order. He will try to break you. Break me? Naruto asked, a hint of amusement in his voice as he took another bite of rice. He's welcome to try. Her pacing stopped. She stared at him, at his infuriating, unshakable calm. You don't understand. This isn't a fight. You can't punch your way out of this. It will be a battle of words, of posture, of implication. He will dissect every answer you give, every breath you take. He will use my presence, my honor, my connection to you, as a weapon against you. He will try to box you in, to define you, so that he knows how to control you or dispose of you. Naruto finished his rice and set the bowl aside. He stood up, towering over her slightly. His gaze was steady, and the morning sun caught the gold in his hair. Rukia, I've faced down assassins, monsters, and beings who thought they were gods. Trust me, I can handle a conversation with your brother. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. The warmth of it seeped through the fabric of her shihakusho, a small, reassuring anchor in the storm of her anxiety. It'll be okay. Just lead the way. The Kuchiki manor was less a home and more a monument to sterile perfection. It was a sprawling compound of dark, polished wood and white paper screens, surrounded by a high wall that seemed to suck the very sound from the air. The grounds were not filled with vibrant, chaotic flowers, but with meticulously raked gardens of white sand, where each pebble was placed with geometric precision. The air smelled of old wood, clean paper, and the cold, faint scent of camellias. It was the smell of tradition, a fragrance that so UGHT to suffocate anything new or different. They were led through a labyrinth of silent, echoing corridors by the same impassive servant. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft whisper of their own footsteps on the polished floorboards. Rukia walked with a ramrod straight posture, the familiar weight of her ancestral home settling upon her, forcing her back into the role of the dutiful, lesser Kuchiki. Naruto, by contrast, walked with a relaxed, easy stride, his hands tucked in his pockets as he observed his surroundings with open curiosity. He didn't seem intimidated, he seemed like a tourist. They were shown into a large, empty room. The far wall was a single, massive pane of glass looking out onto a perfectly still pond. In the center of the room, seated on a simple zabuton cushion, was Rukia Kuchiki. He was dressed in immaculate formal robes, his kenseikan hairpieces gleaming. He did not look up as they entered. He was carefully, methodically cleaning his zanpakuto, senbon sakura, the blade reflecting the cold gray light. You may kneel, he said, his voice as calm and flat as the surface of the pond outside. His words were directed at both of them. Rukia immediately dropped to a formal seiza position, her eyes fixed on the tatami mat in front of her. Naruto remained standing. Rukia paused his polishing. He lifted his gaze slowly, his gray eyes, cold as a winter sky, fixing on Naruto. I gave you an instruction. And I heard it, Naruto replied, his voice respectful but unyielding. But where I'm from, you only kneel before your sworn lord, or when you've been defeated. I haven't done either. A dangerous silence filled the room. Rukia held her breath, convinced her brother was about to draw his blade. The sheer audacity of the refusal was an insult of the highest order. Rukia's expression did not change, but a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps even a sliver of intrigue, passed through his eyes. He set his sword aside with painstaking care. As you wish. The customs of barbarians are of no concern to me. He gestured to a cushion opposite him. Sit. Rukia, you will serve the tea. Rukia moved with practiced, automatic grace, her mind reeling. He hadn't punished Naruto for his insolence. He had accommodated it. It was a subtle shift in power, a concession Naruto had won before the conversation had even truly begun. Naruto sat cross-legged on the cushion, a posture far too informal for this setting, and watched as Rukia prepared the tea with the quiet, flawless movements of the traditional ceremony. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. It was a tactic, Naruto knew. A way to make the other person uncomfortable, to force them to speak first and reveal something of themselves. He was content to wait. He could sit in silence for days if he had to. Finally, after Rukia had served the tea and retreated to a respectful distance, Byakuya spoke. You have made a considerable impression on the Seraite, Naruto Uzumaki. I've noticed, Naruto said, taking a sip of the tea. It was bitter. You possess a power that defies our understanding, Byakuya continued, his voice a low monotone. You wield it with the finesse of a craftsman and the recklessness of a child. You have humbled a captain and sown discord among the divisions. Some now call you a hero. Others a menace. I have yet to form an opinion. Don't strain yourself on my account, Naruto said, placing the cup down. Byakuya's eyes narrowed fractionally. I wish to know your purpose. Your true purpose, not the simplistic tale of a lost traveler you fed to the head captain. Power of your magnitude is never aimless. It is either harnessed for a cause or it runs rampant, destroying everything in its path. So, which are you? A weapon seeking a master, or a natural disaster waiting to happen? Naruto met his cold gaze without flinching. Neither. I'm just a man looking for a reason to get up in the morning that doesn't involve having to save the world. The answer was so blunt, so utterly devoid of political maneuvering, that it seemed to momentarily stump Byakuya. He had expected a declaration, a hidden agenda, a negotiation. He had not expected existential ennui. Reason. Byakuya repeated the word as if it were a foreign object. Duty is the only reason a warrior requires. The protection of the law. The preservation of order. These are absolutes. They do not require soul-searching. Maybe for you, Naruto countered. But your order feels like a museum. Everything is clean and quiet and in its proper place, but nothing feels alive. You're all busy following the rules that you've forgotten how to live. We are guardians of the souls of the dead, Byakuya stated, his voice laced with ice. Our existence is not for personal fulfillment. It is for the sake of the balance between worlds. A balance your very presence now threatens. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity palpable. Which brings me to my sister. Rukia flinched as if struck. She has been assigned as your keeper, Byakuya said, his gaze flicking to her for a bare second before returning to Naruto. A foolish decision, but one I must abide by. Her association with you places her, and the honor of the Kuchiki clan, in a precarious position. Your every action reflects upon her now. If you step out of line, it is her reputation that will be stained. If you prove to be a threat, it is she who will bear the shame of failing to contain you. It was a threat, cloaked in the language of concern. He was using Rukia as a leash. Naruto's expression, for the first time, hardened. The easy-going calm was replaced by something colder, sharper. Are you finished? Byakuya raised an eyebrow. I've met men like you before, Naruto said, his voice low and steady. Men who hide behind words like honor and duty to control the people they're supposed to care about. You don't give a damn about Rukia's honor. You care about your family's name. You're using her as a shield to protect your own pride. Let me be clear, I am not a threat to the Soul Society. But if you ever try to use her to manipulate me again, you will find out what a real threat looks like. The air in the room crackled. The temperature seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Naruto wasn't flaring his power, not in a way a Shinigami could sense. But the sheer force of his will, his absolute conviction, pressed down on the room like a physical weight. It was the presence of a cage, a leader who had bent nations to his will. Rukia stared, her heart hammering in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her brother like that. No one had ever dared. Byakuya was utterly still, his face an unreadable mask of aristocratic ice. But his hands, resting on his knees, were clenched into tight fists. He was a man of perfect control. And he had just been completely, thoroughly stripped of it. He had tried to find Naruto's weakness, to identify his levers of control, and instead, Naruto had found his. After a long, tense moment, Byakuya visibly composed himself. He unclenched his fists. "Your conviction is noted," he said, the words clipped. "This meeting is over. You may leave." Naruto stood up, gave a slight, almost mocking bow of his head, and turned to the door. "Come on, Rukia." Rukia, shaking slightly, scrambled to her feet and followed him out, not daring to look back at her brother. As the shoji screen slid shut behind them, leaving Byakuya alone in the silent, perfect room, she felt as if she had just walked out of her own tomb and into the sunlight. They walked in silence for a long time, putting distance between themselves and the suffocating perfection of the Kuchiki estate. Rukia's mind was a whirlwind. She was terrified of the repercussions, but she was also filled with a dizzying, unfamiliar sense of liberation. "He's going to make our lives difficult," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "He was already going to do that," Naruto replied, his stride returning to its easygoing rhythm. "At least now he knows the rules." "The rules? You threatened the head of one of the 4 great noble clans in his own home." "No," Naruto corrected her. "I set a boundary. There's a difference." He stopped and turned to her, his expression serious again. "I meant what I said. I won't let him use you." She looked up at him, at the fierce loyalty burning in his blue eyes, and felt something shift inside her. In her world, relationships were defined by hierarchy, by duty, by obligation. Byakuya's protection was a cage of responsibility. But Naruto's was a shield, offered freely, with no strings attached. It was a completely new concept to her. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling small and inadequate. He just smiled, the warmth returning to his face. "That's what friends are for." Now, what's next on the agenda for the Seraite's most notorious tourist? The answer to that question came soon after they returned to the 13th Division barracks. Captain Yukitake, looking slightly more pale than usual but with his customary kind smile, summoned them to his office. "A new assignment has come down from Central 46, he announced, gesturing to a scroll on his desk. "It's a delicate situation. A spiritual convergence point in the 34th district of the Rukin, Kogen, has become unstable. These points are like wells, regulating the flow of reishi in the outer districts. This one is fluctuating wildly. If it collapses, it could wipe the entire district off the map." "A simple stabilization mission, then?" Rukia asked. "Not quite," Yukitake said, his smile tightening. "Due to the political sensitivity surrounding Naruto's presence, Central 46 has appointed an oversight committee for this mission. Specifically, Lord Takayoshi Ayanokoji." Rukia's face fell. "Lord Takayoshi? But he's one of Captain Araki's most vocal supporters. He sits on the council for the noble family's assembly." "Precisely," Yukitake said with a sigh. "He believes Shinigami tradition and Kido are the only solutions to this problem. He has expressed concerns about Naruto's unorthodox methods. He will be accompanying you to ensure protocol is followed." Naruto leaned against the doorframe. "So he's a babysitter. An influential and easily offended babysitter," Yukitake corrected gently. "This is a test, for both of you. For you, Naruto, to prove you can work within our system. And for you, Rukia, to prove you can manage him. Please, be diplomatic." The 34th district was a study in faded glory. It had once been a prosperous area, but now the ornate buildings were crumbling, their gold leaf peeling. At its center was a deep, stone-lined well, from which a shimmering, almost invisible column of energy rose into the sky. It was this column that was fluctuating, pulsing with an erratic, sickly light. The air around it felt wrong, vibrating with a dissonant hum that set one's teeth on edge. Lord Takayoshi was already there, flanked by 2 stern-faced attendants. He was a man whose arrogance was written in the sneer of his lips and the disdainful arch of his eyebrows. He was dressed in silken robes that were far too fine for the dusty district. "Lieutenant Kuchiki," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He completely ignored Naruto. "You are late. This spiritual miasma is growing more unstable by the minute. You will begin the containment Kido at once." Your companion, he finally deigned to glance at Naruto, will remain outside the well's perimeter. We cannot risk his chaotic energy contaminating the ritual. Rukia bristled but bowed her head. As you command, Lord Takayoshi. She and her team moved forward, taking up positions around the well. They began the complex chant for a high-level binding spell, a spiritual net designed to calm the energy fluctuations. As their voices rose in unison, blue chains of Keto energy erupted from their hands, weaving together over the mouth of the well. Naruto watched from the perimeter, his arms crossed. He wasn't looking at the Keto spell. His eyes were closed. He was in sage mode, but he wasn't just observing. He was listening. He was extending his senses deep into the earth, following the flow of the spiritual well. Trying to understand its nature. What he felt was odd. It wasn't a leak. The well wasn't overflowing with excess energy, which is what the Shinigami assumed. The energy flows were tangled, knotted, like a garden hose that had been twisted back on itself. Their Keto was a bandage, trying to suppress the pressure, but it wasn't addressing the cause. It was trying to hold back a flood by building a dam on the wrong river. The Keto chains strained, glowing brighter as the pressure from the well pushed back. One of the younger Shinigami faltered, his chain flickering. Maintain the chant, Rukia commanded, pouring more of her own Raryoku into the spell. Their Keto is failing, Takayoshi sneered to one of his attendants, just loud enough for Naruto to hear. As expected, Lieutenant Kuchiki's skill has been diluted by her association with that creature. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He ignored the insult. He had found the problem. He walked forward, stepping over the perimeter line Takayoshi had established. What do you think you are doing? Takayoshi demanded, stepping in his path. I gave you a direct order, outsider. Naruto didn't even look at him. You're doing it wrong, he said. His focus on the straining energy net. You're trying to cap the pressure. You need to untie the knot. He walked past the sputtering noble and stepped right up to the edge of the well. Rukia, on my mark. Drop the spell, all of you. What? That's insane, she yelled over the hum of the energy. If we release it, the well will blow. It's going to blow anyway if you keep this up, he countered. His voice calm and certain. Trust me, she stared at him, her mind at war. Her training, her orders, every instinct she had as a Shinigami screamed at her not to listen. But the look in his eyes, the absolute confidence, was the same look he'd had in the arena, the same look he'd had in her brother's study. It was the look of a man who saw things others didn't. On your mark, she decided, gritting her teeth. This is treason, Takayoshi shrieked. I will have you all executed for this. Now, Naruto yelled. Rukia and her team cut their Keto. The blue energy net dissolved. For a heart-stopping moment, the energy column from the well swelled, roaring like a beast unleashed. Naruto slammed his palms onto the stone lip of the well. He wasn't pushing Raryoku into it. He was channeling his own chakra. The vibrant, golden energy of his life force, combined with the pure essence of natural energy from Sage Mode. It flowed into the ground, not as a blunt instrument, but as a surgeon's scalpel. He wasn't fighting the well's energy, he was harmonizing with it. He found the central knot he had sensed deep below the earth and, with a gentle but firm push of his chakra, he nudged the tangled flows. It was like spiritual acupuncture. The flows resisted for a moment, and then, with a great, shuddering sigh that seemed to run through the very ground, they untangled. The roaring column of energy smoothed out, the sickly light faded, and it settled back into a calm, steady, shimmering stream. The dissonant hum was gone, replaced by a gentle, peaceful thrum. The well was stable, purified, healthier than it had been in centuries. The entire process took less than 5 seconds. Rukia and her squad stared, their mouths agape. Lord Takayoshi was speechless, his face a mask of purple fury and disbelief. Naruto pulled his hands back, dusting them off. See, a knot. As he stood up, his Sage Mode senses, still extended, brushed against Lord Takayoshi's spiritual signature again. And there it was, faint, almost undetectable, but undeniably present. The same cold, corrupted, ancient taint he had sensed from the portal the Manos had used. It clung to the noble like a foul perfume. This wasn't just political opposition. Takayoshi wasn't just a traditionalist zealot. He was connected, Somehow, to the true enemy. A cold dread settled in Naruto's stomach. The rot within the Soul Society ran deeper than he thought. The return to the Seraite was thick with unspoken tension. Lord Takayoshi had stormed off without a word, his humiliation complete. Rukia had filed the official report. A masterpiece of understatement that credited the success to unorthodox assistants under Lieutenant Kuchiki's supervision. That evening, many of the off-duty officers from the 8th, 10th, and 13th divisions gathered at a small, elegant tea house favored by the nobility. It was a place of quiet conversation and political maneuvering. Rukia was there with Renji and a few others, trying to decompress. The air was buzzing with whispers about the incident at the well. Then, Lord Takayoshi entered, and the temperature of the room dropped. He saw Rukia, and his face twisted into a sneer. He strode over to her table, his attendants trailing behind him. "Lieutenant Kuchiki," he began, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I have just come from filing my own report to Central 46. A report on your gross incompetence and your reliance on the whims of a savage beast to do your work for you." Renji stood up. "Lord Takayoshi, that's out of line." Takayoshi ignored him. "You shame your brother. You shame your clan. To think that a Kuchiki would allow an outsider, a creature of mud and filth, to supersede her authority. Perhaps you have spent so much time in H's presence that you have forgotten what true nobility is. You have become tarnished." The insult was vicious, a direct attack on her honor and her family's name. The room fell silent. Everyone watched, waiting to see how the Kuchiki lieutenant would respond. Rukia was frozen, the words striking her like physical blows. Before she could even form a response, a calm voice cut through the silence. Quote, "She's more noble in her little finger than you are in your entire bloodline." Naruto was standing at the entrance to the tea house. He hadn't been with them, but he must have heard the commotion. He walked slowly, deliberately towards their table. He wasn't radiating power. He wasn't scowling. His face was perfectly calm. But his presence filled the room, a quiet, magnetic authority that made everyone else seem small. Takayoshi whirled on him. "You dare. You have no place here, beast." Naruto stopped in front of their table, standing between Takayoshi and Rukia. He looked down at the sputtering noble, his blue eyes as deep and clear as the open sky. "A noble person is someone who protects others," Naruto said, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. "A noble person is someone who is honest. Even when it's hard. A noble person has the strength to admit when they are wrong." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "A coward is someone who hides behind his family's nom. To sabotage his own allies because his pride is hurt. A coward is someone who attacks a woman's honor in public because he's too afraid to face the man who proved him wrong. You're not a noble, Takayoshi. You're just a coward in a nice robe." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a single threatening gesture. He simply spoke the truth, and the truth had more power than any Kido spell. Lord Takayoshi's face went from red to white. He was utterly exposed, his arrogance stripped away by a few simple, cutting words. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a man who lived by social power, and Naruto had just rendered him bankrupt in front of his peers. Humiliated beyond recovery, he turned and fled the tea house, his attendants scurrying after him. The silence remained for a moment, and then the quiet buzz of conversation slowly returned, now filled with hushed, awestruck whispers about Naruto. Naruto looked down at Rukia. "You okay?" She could only nod, her throat tight with emotion. He hadn't fought for her like a possession. He hadn't roared or made a scene. He had defended her honor by affirming her own strength and character, while exposing her attacker's lack of it. It was the most profound gesture of respect she had ever received. He pulled out a chair from another table and sat down backwards, resting his arms on the backrest. He gave her a small, lopsided grin. "So, is the tea here any good? The stuff your brother served was terrible." Renji started to laugh, breaking the last of the tension, and soon the whole table was smiling. Rukia looked at Naruto, who was already arguing with Renji about the merits of different types of tea, and felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with her drink. In a world of rigid order and cold tradition, he was a force of pure, unadulterated life, and she realized, with a startling clarity that both thrilled and terrified her, that she wouldn't have him any other way. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Desert of Silent Screams. The emergency summons crackled through the Seraite with the urgency of a lightning strike. It wasn't a meeting for a single division, it was a priority briefing for the captains of the 3rd, 6th, 10th, and 13th Divisions, convened in the solemn, imposing assembly hall of the 1st Division barracks. The air was thick with the weight of their collective ritual pressure and the unspoken question that hung between them. Head Captain Yamamoto stood before them, his ancient face carved from stone, his eyes closed. But this was not a posture of rest, it was one of deep, simmering concern. At his side, Captain Soma of the 2nd Division unrolled a scroll. Reports from the Onmitsukido patrols in Hueco Mundo, Soma began, his voice devoid of emotion. Over the past 48 hours, we have recorded the complete disappearance of 17 separate hollow colonies. Estimated numbers are in the thousands. Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya of the 10th Division frowned, his youthful features pulled into a serious scowl. Disappearance? Do you mean they were destroyed? Infighting is common among hollows. Negative, Captain Hitsugaya, Soma replied. There are no significant signs of battle. No residual Raryoku signatures consistent with extermination by Shinigami, Quincy, or rival hollow factions. The colonies are simply gone. Vanished. In their place, our patrols are finding these. He gestured to an aide, who brought forward a large, cloth-covered object. Soma pulled the cloth away, revealing a jagged, crystalline shard the size of a man's torso. It was a milky white, shot through with veins of a sickening, grayish purple. It seemed to drink the light in the room, and it pulsed with a faint, discordant energy that felt fundamentally wrong. Naruto, standing behind Captain Yukitake along with Rukia, felt a familiar chill. His sage mode wasn't even active, but his senses recoiled from the object. It was the same twisted, corrupted natural energy he had felt from the portal. The same faint taint that clung to Lord Takayoshi. This substance is appearing where the hollows vanish, Soma explained. It is spiritually inert to our scanners. Yet it radiates a deeply corrupting aura. Furthermore, we have a new development. A single, powerful Arankar has emerged. He is not conquering territory in the traditional sense. He is recruiting. Hollows don't recruit, they devour. Captain Rojiro Odoribashi of the 3rd Division commented, adjusting his hat. This one does, Yamamoto's deep voice rumbled, his eyes snapping open to fix on the assembled captains. He does not use fear as his primary tool. He uses something far more dangerous, a promise. The head captain's gaze swept the room. He offers them what he calls salvation from the cycle, a release from their hunger, their torment, their endless, meaningless existence. He is not building an army of brutes. He is forging an army of believers. And they are gathering in the one place with enough strategic significance to pose a true threat, the ruins of Las Noches. A heavy silence descended. Aizen's fortress. Even in ruins, the name carried a legacy of terror and war. Yukitake was the first to speak, his gentle voice cutting through the tension. Head captain, the corrupted energy from that crystal, it is the same as what Naruto Uzumaki described. His unique sensory abilities might be our best chance at understanding the nature of this threat. All eyes turned to Naruto. He met their gazes steadily. It's a perversion of life energy, he stated simply. It's like taking something pure and twisting it until it becomes a poison. It's not just destructive, it's designed to unravel things on a fundamental level. Yamamoto nodded slowly. I agree. Uzumaki's presence on this mission is non-negotiable. He then turned his gaze to the impassive form of Rukia Kuchiki. Captain Kuchiki, the stability of the realms is at stake. The 6th Division will participate. Rukia inclined his head. Very well. Lieutenant Abarai and Lieutenant Kuchiki will represent the 6th. Their experience in Hueco Mundo is well documented. They will ensure Gotei 13 protocols are maintained. Rukia stiffened. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order from her brother, delivered via the head captain. He was sending her into the lion's den, not just to fight, but to watch Naruto. To keep him leashed. Excellent. Yamamoto continued. We have the sensors and the strategists. Now we need the firepower. His eyes found the one captain who had been silent this whole time, leaning against a far pillar with a look of profound boredom that was quickly turning into a wide, bloodthirsty grin. Captain Zaraki. I trust the 11th Division is not too occupied. Kenpachi Zaraki pushed himself off the pillar. The bells in his hair jingling ominously. His spiritual pressure, a jagged, crushing force, flooded the room. Hey, you're sending him, he growled, hooking a thumb towards Naruto. Then you better send me. If this new Arankar doesn't give me a good fight, maybe the golden boy will. The tension in the room skyrocketed. The idea of unleashing Kenpachi Zaraki and Naruto Uzumaki in the same theater of operations was terrifying. It was like trying to put out a fire with a volcano. Your orders are to neutralize the Arankar leader and ascertain the nature of his forces, Captain Zaraki, Yamamoto said. His voice a clear warning. Nothing more. This is an investigation and elimination mission, not a festival of destruction. Am I understood? Kenpachi just grinned, a promise of chaos in his eyes. Loud and clear, the Garganta tore open the sky above the Seraite, a screaming black vortex of chaotic energy. The assembled mission force stood before it, Naruto, Rukia, Renji, and the elite vanguard of the 11th Division, Captain Zaraki himself, his tiny Lieutenant Yakiru perched on his shoulder, the stoic Akaku Madarame, and the flamboyant Yumachika Yasugawa. All right, let's go kill something. Kenpachi roared, and plunged into the swirling darkness without a second's hesitation. His squad followed with practiced ease. Renji looked at the portal, then at Naruto. You get used to him, he said with a grimace. What's there to get used to? Naruto asked, a small smile on his face. He seemed straightforward. He stepped towards the portal and paused, turning to Rukia. She was staring into the Garganta, her expression tight. He knew this place held painful memories for her. You ready? He asked quietly. She looked at him, surprised by the gentle concern. She took a breath, her resolve hardening. Always. Together, they stepped through. The transition was jarring, a sensation of being torn apart and reassembled. They emerged not into darkness, but into a world of blinding, eternal white. An endless desert of pale sand stretched to a horizon that never seemed to get closer, all under a perpetually dark sky ruled by a black, unblinking moon. The air was dead, still, and oppressive. There was no wind, no sound, no life. Naruto's first breath in Hueco Mundo was sharp. It's empty, he murmured, his senses reaching out and finding almost nothing. The natural energy is so thin here. It's all just raw spiritual particles. No wonder things that live here are so hungry. Rukia looked at him, intrigued by his perception. To her, this had always been a battlefield. A wasteland of enemies. He saw it as a place of profound sadness, a world starved of life. Las Noches is that way, Renji said, pointing towards a shattered line on the horizon. Had resolved itself into the broken ruins of a colossal fortress. Let's move before we attract unwanted attention. Kenpachi was already halfway there, moving at a loping run that devoured the distance. Last one, there's a rotten egg. Yakiru squealed from his shoulder. He's going to get us all killed, Yumachika sighed, adjusting his feathers with a dramatic flair. Nah, he's just going to get himself a good fight, Akaku grinned, patting the hilt of his Zanpakuto. As they drew closer, the scale of the destruction became apparent. Las Noches was a corpse. Towers were cleaved in two, walls were blasted into rubble, and the great dome was shattered, open to the black sky. It was a monument to a past war. But it wasn't uninhabited. They entered through a gaping hole in the main wall, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous, silent halls. The interior was a maze of white corridors and vast, empty chambers. And then they found them. In a chamber so large it could have housed a small town, thousands of hollows were gathered. But they weren't fighting or roaring. They were standing in silent, orderly lines, like supplicants in a temple. At the far end of the chamber was a raised dais, upon which stood a lone Arankar. He was tall and slender, with sleek, silver hair and calm, intelligent eyes. The remnants of his hollow mask formed a simple, elegant diadem on his brow. Before him, one by one, the hollows knelt. The Arankar, Xylos, would place a hand on the kneeling hollow's mask. From his palm, a sliver of the gray-purple crystal would emerge, merging with the mask. The hollow would shudder, its spiritual pressure flaring and stabilizing, becoming stronger, more focused. But its eyes would grow dull, the spark of individual savagery extinguished, replaced by a placid, unnerving obedience. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He's not just empowering them. He's rewriting them, turning them into puppets. He could feel it in his bones. The process was feeding that corrupted energy, using the hollows themselves as batteries. Looks like we found the party, Kenpachi growled, his grin splitting his face. The sheer, overwhelming spiritual pressure of thousands of hollows was like a drug to him. Xylos looked up, his calm eyes settling on the intruders. He didn't seem surprised. Shinigami, he said, his voice smooth and resonant, echoing through the vast chamber. You have come sooner than I anticipated. But no matter, you can bear witness to the glorious dawn of a new age. We're here to put an end to your little cult, Arankar, Renji shouted, drawing Zabumaru. Xylos smiled, a serene, pitying expression. Cult, no, this is an awakening. I am merely the herald. But you will not stop it. You cannot. He raised a hand. Show them the truth of their folly. It was the signal. The thousands of altered hollows turned in perfect unison, their new, blank eyes fixing on the Shinigami. There was no roar of challenge. Only a terrifying, coordinated silence as they surged forward. A tide of white bone and crystalline power. Finally, Kenpachi bellowed, and the battle began. He was a force of nature, a maelstrom of destruction. His blade, Nozarashi, scythed through the front ranks, sending bodies flying. Akaku released his Shikai, Hozukimaru, its 3 sections a whirlwind of steel. Yumachika used his Kido, picking off targets with beautiful, deadly precision. But the hollows were different. Their crystal-infused hides were like armor, deflecting blows that should have been fatal. Their attacks were not wild and random, they were coordinated, moving in phalanxes, flanking, cutting off retreat. There's too many of them. Renji yelled, his Zabumaru lashing out like a giant serpent, but for every 3 he smashed aside, 5 more took their place. Rukia was a blur of white and black, her blade a flicker of ice. Sota no Shirayuki, Sum no Mai, Tsukishiro. A perfect circle of ice erupted on the ground, freezing dozens of hollows in place, but more just clambered over their frozen comrades. The situation was deteriorating. They were being swarmed, bogged down by sheer numbers and uncanny tactics. Naruto's eyes darted across the entire battlefield, his sage mode processing thousands of data points at once. He saw every threat, every opening, every faltering defense. The time for observation was over. This isn't a brawl, it's a war. He yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. Listen to me if you want to live. Kenpachi, you're the vanguard. Keep pushing forward, straight for the leader. Don't let them bog you down. To everyone's shock, Kenpachi just laughed. I like this kid. You heard him, let's go. And he carved an even deeper, more brutal path toward the dais. Renji, your Bankai is too chaotic here. Naruto commanded. Keep it in Shikai. Use Zabumaru to form a defensive wall on the right flank. Don't let them get behind us. Akaku, you're with him. Your spear has the reach we need. Renji hesitated for only a second before obeying. His respect for Naruto's tactical sense overriding his pride. He and Akaku formed a steel barricade, holding back the tide. Yumachika, your Kido is our best weapon against their armor. Don't waste it on killing blows, aim for the crystal on their masks. Shatter their focus. Rukia, I need you to control the field. Forget individuals. Freeze the ground, create walls of ice, slow them down. Give us space to move. He wasn't just fighting, he was conducting an orchestra of violence. As he gave orders, he moved, a golden blur across the battlefield. He created 24 shadow clones. They weren't there for a mass attack. They were a support unit, intercepting hollows that broke through the lines, pulling injured squad members out of harm's way, and acting as relays for his commands. He was everywhere at once, plugging gaps in their defense before they even fully formed. A colossal, Ejuka's class hollow, its entire body plated in the purple-gray crystal, broke through the line. Its sights set on Rukia while she was in the middle of casting a large-scale spell. It raised a massive clawed hand to crush her. Rukia, now, Naruto's voice yelled in her ear. She didn't know what he was planning. But she trusted him. She completed her incantation. Tsugi no Mai, Hakuren. A colossal wave of pure white energy, an avalanche of absolute zero, surged from her blade. The Ajukas roared, smashing through the wave, its crystal armor cracking but holding. But the blast of cold had slowed its attack for a single, crucial second. That was all Naruto needed. He appeared in the air above it, a swirling sphere of wind-style chakra in his palm, a Rasengan. He didn't throw it, he slammed it down onto the creature's head. The condensed, rotating energy drilled out the crystal plating and the hollow's mask like it was paper. The creature froze, and then, with a silent implosion, its entire upper body disintegrated. Their teamwork was perfect, an unspoken, instinctive dance of ice and wind. With their strongest unit defeated and the Shinigami now fighting as a cohesive, brutally efficient force under Naruto's command, the tide of the battle began to turn. The disciplined drones were being systematically dismantled. Xylos watched from his dais, his serene smile never wavering. He raised a hand, and the remaining hollows ceased their attack, retreating into the shadows of the vast hall. Kenpachi, deprived of his fight, glared at him. The fun's over already. It has barely begun, Xylos said calmly. He stepped down from the dais, his gaze settling on Naruto. You, the anomaly. Your energy is an affront to the coming silence. But your methods are impressive. You see the whole board. Cut the crap, Naruto said, his clones dissipating as he rejoined the group. Who are you? What do you want? Xylos's smile widened. I am Xylos, a humble servant. And what I want is what all beings in this broken reality truly desire, even if they don't know it. An end. A release. He spread his arms wide, a messianic fervor entering his voice. For eons, we have been trapped in the great lie. This cycle of life, death, and reincarnation. This prison of emotion and suffering. All held together by the power of a false god, the Soul King. We hunger, we fight, we die, we are reborn, only to do it all again. It is a pointless, agonizing machine. And we have come to break it. You're insane, Renji spat. Am I? Xylos countered, his eyes burning with conviction. Or am I the first sane one you have ever met? I offer them a gift. I take their pain, their hunger, their individuality, the very sources of their suffering, and in return, I give them purpose. A role in the great unmaking. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Soon, the architects of our salvation will arrive. They will shatter the Soul King's throne. They will collapse all realms. Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, the world of the living, back into the primordial, perfect state of absolute nothingness. A silent, uniform peace. A cold dread, far deeper than any fear of battle, settled over them. This was not the simple lust for destruction of a hollow. This was a cosmic, nihilistic philosophy. An ideology of absolute annihilation. Who are you serving? Naruto demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Xylos's face lit up with ecstatic reverence. A name was spoken for the first time in the desolate halls of Las Noches, a name that would come to define the war to come. We are the blessed children of the true creators. We will be liberated by the ordained. The name echoed in the vast, empty chamber, filled with a chilling finality. The ordained. The enemy finally had a name. And their goal was not conquest, but the complete erasure of existence. Naruto looked at the fanatical zeal in Xylos's eyes, then at the weary, battered faces of his comrades. The peace he had fought a world war to achieve was a distant memory. He had come to this world seeking a new purpose, a quiet life. Instead, he had found himself on the front lines of a new war, a war not for land or power, but for the right of anything, anywhere, to simply exist. The weight of it all, heavier than any he had ever known, settled onto his shoulders. And under the black moon of Hueco Mundo, he did not flinch. He accepted it. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Broken Oath. The name hung in the dead air of Las Noches. An epitaph for a world they didn't even know was dying. The ordained. It had the weight of ancient stone, of an unalterable decree. For the Shinigami of the Gotei 13. Whose entire existence was predicated on the law and the cycle, the concept of an enemy who wanted to burn the whole book was a new kind of terror. Kenpachi Zaraki, however, was not terrified. He was bored. The ordained, the unordained, who gives a damn? He growled, the raw, jagged edge of his spiritual pressure surging back to the forefront. He pointed the chipped and battered tip of Nozarashi at the serene Arankar. Enough talking. You promised a good fight. You haven't delivered. All you've done is send your little puppets and flap your gums. Xylos's calm, messianic expression shifted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Your lust for battle is a symptom of the disease, Captain Zaraki. A meaningless spasm in a dying body. Maybe, Kenpachi said, a grin stretching across his face that was all teeth. But it's a hell of a lot more fun than listening to you. He vanished, not with the fluid grace of Shunpo, but with a raw, explosive burst of speed that tore up the ground beneath him. He reappeared directly in front of Xylos, his blade descending in a cleaving blow meant to split the Urankar from crown to navel. The clash, when it came, was wrong. There was no screech of steel on steel. No explosive shower of sparks. Kenpachi's blade struck Xylos's outstretched palm, and the sound was a dull, hollow thump, like an axe hitting dead wood. A wave of the sick, gray, purple crystalline energy flared from Xylos's hand, crawling up Kenpachi's Zanpakuto like a foul frost. Kenpachi's eyes widened, not in pain, but in sheer disbelief. The ferocious, cutting power of his Ryutsu, the very force that allowed him to slice through buildings, was being eaten. The crystal spread, and the spiritual energy of his blade seemed to just turn off, nullified in its presence. My power is not for clashing, Captain, Xylos said, his voice level. It is for unmaking. The gift of the ordained is the power of nullity. Why struggle against an opponent when you can simply convince their energy it doesn't exist? He pushed, and Kenpachi, for the first time in 100 battles, was thrown backward, stumbling to regain his footing. He stared at his blade. The section touched by the crystal was inert, dead. It felt like a simple piece of iron, the roaring soul of Nozarashi temporarily silenced. What did you do to my sword? He whispered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble of pure fury. I merely reminded it of its own impermanence, Xylos replied, turning his attention away from the enraged captain. His eyes, cool and analytical, found Naruto. You, on the other hand. Your energy is different. It is not of the cycle. It is something far older. A chaotic relic of the world before the Great Lie was imposed. You are the true anomaly here. Before Naruto could respond, Kenpachi roared and charged again, his rage overriding all strategy. He swung with his other hand, a devastating punch that carried the force of a meteor. Xylos didn't meet it. He swayed aside, and with a touch as light as a feather. He tapped Kenpachi's arm. The same nullifying crystal flared, and the captain's attack dissipated into nothing, his arm going limp at his side. It's useless, Naruto said, his voice cutting through Kenpachi's roars of frustration. You can't fight him head-on. His power isn't a shield, it's a drain. The more spiritual pressure you throw at him, the stronger it gets. Then what do we do? Renji asked, his hand tight on Zabumaru's hilt. We can't just let him stand there. Naruto's eyes were glowing with the power of Sage Mode, his gaze fixed on Xylos, but he was seeing something far deeper than the Urankar's physical form. He was seeing the flow of energy, the way the corrupted power circulated through Xylos's body, and beneath it all, a single, earring point of light, a core of something that was not hollow. It was the faint, struggling echo of a Shinigami's soul. He's a terrible matchup for a Shinigami, Naruto observed, his mind racing. But he's not invincible. His power works on spiritual energy. Ryutsu. It's designed to counter your Zanpakuto, your Kido, your very existence. He took a half step forward. But I don't use Ryutsu. Xylos's serene composure finally faltered, a genuine look of surprise appearing on his face. What? This, Naruto said, raising his hand. A perfect, spinning sphere of pure chakra, a Rasengan, formed in his palm. It was not Kido. It was not a spiritual technique. It was a vortex of raw, physical energy, needed and shaped by a different set of rules. It felt alive, vibrant, a stark contrast to the deadening nullity of Xylos's power. This is something else entirely. He moved, a blur of gold and black. Xylos, for the first time, looked alarmed. He erected a shield of the gray-purple crystal, a solid, shimmering wall. Naruto didn't try to smash through it. As he ran, his other hand wove a series of signs. Sage Art. Lava Release Rasenshuriken. The Rasengan in his hand exploded outwards, S formed into a spinning vortex of molten rock and superheated steam, its shriek tearing at the dead air. He hurled it, not at the shield, but at the floor just in front of it. The impact was cataclysmic. A wave of lava erupted, melting the very sand of Hueco Mundo's floor into glass. The shield held against the heat, but the sheer kinetic force of the blast sent Xylos stumbling backward. And the steam, the superheated, chakra-infused steam, billowed up and around the shield, enveloping him. It wasn't a spiritual attack. It was a physical one, an environmental assault Xylos's nullification powers had no answer for. Blinded and disoriented within the swirling cloud, Xylos was vulnerable for a fraction of a second. It was more than enough time. Naruto was already moving, appearing behind Xylos from the other side of the steam cloud. He didn't have a weapon in his hand. He simply chopped down with the edge of his palm, striking the back of Xylos's neck. It was a perfect, precise blow, infused not with destructive chakra, but with just enough force to sever the connection between brain and body. Xylos's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, unconscious. The battle was over. Silence reigned. Kenpachi stared, his rage forgotten, replaced by a look of grudging admiration. Renji and Rukia just looked stunned. Naruto had defeated a foe who could neutralize Captain Zaraki not with overwhelming power, but with superior tactics and an outside context ability. Well, Akaku said, breaking the quiet. That's one way to do it. The mission was complete. Renji moved forward, Zabima, Ru shifting back into its sealed katana form. The order was to neutralize the leader. Let's finish this. He raised his sword to deliver the executing blow. Stop. The word was quiet, but it had the force of a physical blow. Renji froze, turning to see Naruto standing in his way, his arm outstretched. Get out of the way, Naruto, Renji said, his brow furrowed in confusion. He's the enemy. We need to eliminate him. No, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the unconscious form of Xylos. We don't. Rukia stepped forward, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. Naruto, what are you doing? The head captain's orders were clear. He is a traitor to the Soul Society, a threat to the balance. He must be executed. Was he a traitor before the Soul Society betrayed him first? Naruto shot back, his blue eyes flashing with a cold fire. He looked at them, his gaze sweeping over the squad. Didn't you listen to what he said? Did you hear the truth in it? It was the rambling of a lunatic. Renji argued. He wants to destroy everything. He wants revenge. Naruto corrected him. He was a Shinigami, a researcher who discovered something he wasn't supposed to know. He tried to warn Central 46, and for his trouble. They had him and his team murdered and left him for dead here. He's not a monster because he was born that way. You, the Soul Society, made him this way. His words hung in the air, a terrible accusation. Rukia flinched. The idea that the esteemed, infallible Central 46 could be capable of such a thing was unthinkable. And yet, after her own experiences, her own ATH sentence, it wasn't entirely impossible. Even if that's true, she said, her voice wavering, it doesn't change what he is now. He's aligned with an enemy that wants to unmake reality. He's too dangerous to be left alive. And he's too valuable to be killed, Naruto countered, his voice passionate. He's the only link we have to the ordained. He has information we desperately need. Killing him is the easy way out. It's the stupid way out. It's what they want us to do, to silence him for good so we remain ignorant. He knelt beside Xylos, placing a hand on the fallen Arankar's chest. Beneath all this hate, all this corrupted power, his soul is still in there. I can feel it, a Shinigami's soul, twisted and in agony. I won't kill him. I'm going to try and save him. The declaration was met with stunned silence. Even Kenpachi looked intrigued by this bizarre turn of events. Save him, Renji scoffed. How? Are you going to talk him out of it? He's a hollow-fused Arankar. I have an idea, Naruto said, his expression becoming intensely focused. He had used his 6 paths sage power to create, to heal, to give life. He had never tried to use it to purify something so thoroughly corrupted. He didn't know if it would work, or what it might do to him. But he had to try. He closed his eyes, drawing on the deepest wellspring of his power. Not the destructive force of the Biju, but the gentle, life-giving energy of the Sage of 6 Paths himself. A soft, warm, White light began to emanate from his palm, a stark contrast to the sickly gray purple of Xylos's energy. Naruto, don't! Rukia cried out, sensing the immense, unfamiliar power he was about to unleash. You don't know what that will do. He ignored her, pressing his hand firmly against Xylos's chest. I'm sorry for what they did to you, he whispered to the unconscious man. Let me help you. He poured the yang energy into Xylos. It was not an attack. It was an infusion, an attempt to nurture the flickering emb of the Shinigami soul and drive out the parasitic, corrupted hollow energy. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Xylos's body arched, a silent scream twisting his features. The gray-purple cries, talls all over his body began to crack and smoke, resisting the pure, life-affirming energy. The two forces battled within him, a war between creation and nullity. The corrupted energy, seeing its host being taken from it, fought back with a vengeance. It surged up Naruto's arm, not as a physical attack, but as a psychic one. It used the connection he had forged as a bridge. Naruto's world vanished. He was no longer in Las Noches. He was untethered, adrift in an infinite expanse of absolute, silent black. There were no stars, no light, no sound, no up or down. It was the void, the concept of nothingness given form. The sheer, overwhelming emptiness was a pressure that threatened to extinguish his very consciousness. And in the center of that void, he felt a presence. It was not a being in any sense he understood. It was a consciousness, vast and ancient as the void itself. It was cold, silent, and utterly without emotion. It was a god of emptiness, a being of pure, dispassionate entropy. He couldn't see it, but he could feel its gaze upon him, an awareness that stripped him bare, that saw every memory, every hope, every fear in his soul and dismissed them all as meaningless, temporary noise. This was the source of the corrupted energy. This was the master of the ordained. The harbinger. No words were exchanged. There was no need. In that single, terrifying moment of contact, everything was understood. The harbinger became aware of the golden-haired interloper, this rogue element of pure life energy that had no place in its silent equation. It recognized him not as a nuisance, but as an antithesis. A fundamental threat to its grand design of unmaking. Naruto, in turn, felt the sheer, horrifying scope of its goal. It wasn't malice. It wasn't hatred. It was a cosmic, philosophical drive to return the universe to its original state of perfect, silent zero. It saw life, emotion, and individuality as a flaw in creation, a chaotic error that it intended to correct. A silent promise passed between them across the abyss. I see you, and I will stop you. The connection shattered. Naruto was violently thrown back into his own body. He gasped, collapsing backward, his hand flying from Xylos's chest. He was breathing in ragged, desperate gulps, his heart hammering against his ribs. The world swam back into focus, the white sands of Hueco Mundo, the worried faces of his comrades. Rukia was kneeling at his side, her hand on his shoulder. Naruto, what happened? What was that? He looked at her, his eyes wide with a horror she had never seen in him before. When he spoke, his voice was a raw, strained whisper. I saw him, the enemy. I saw their god. Before them, Xylos's body lay still. The corrupted energy had receded, the crystals crumbling to dust. He was still in a rancor, the purification incomplete. But the overwhelming malevolence was gone, replaced by a deep, stable unconsciousness. The Shinigami soul within him was stronger, no longer on the verge of being extinguished. Renji, Akaku, and even Kenpachi were staring at Naruto, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. They hadn't seen what he had seen, but they had felt it. For a brief, terrible moment, a spiritual pressure so vast, so alien, and so utterly empty had washed over them, a presence that made a Manos Grande feel like an insect. The mission was over, but the war had just become terrifyingly real. Naruto had defied a direct order, created a rift with his allies, and in the process, had painted a target on his back for a being that considered gods to be little more than temporary inconveniences. Rukia looked from Naruto's haunted face to the unconscious form of Xylos. Her duty was clear. She was supposed to report this, to condemn Naruto's insubordination. But her heart, her instinct, her trust in the man beside her, told her something different. He hadn't broken his oath to the Gotei 13 out of arrogance or rebellion. He had done it out of a profound, unshakable sense of what was right. And in that moment, she made a choice of her own. She would stand with him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. When the Heavens Crack. The journey back through the Garganta was a silent, suffocating affair. The swirling chaos of the dimensional passage was a pale imitation of the storm of uncertainty that raged within the small squad. They returned not as conquering heroes, but as the bearers of a terrible truth and a profound transgression. They emerged into the sterile, controlled environment of a 2nd Division transfer station, the Trans. Ishin from Hawako Mundo's dead air to the Seraite's thick reishi so abrupt it was like surfacing from a deep dive. Waiting for them was not a medical corps or a debriefing officer. It was a full contingent of the Onmitsukido, their masked faces and drawn blades forming a silent, unforgiving wall. Captain Soma Kasaragi stood at their head, his severe features colder and harder than ever. Beside him, radiating an aura of smug vindication, stood Lord Takayoshi Ayanokoji. Captain Zaraki, Lieutenant Abarai, Lieutenant Kuchiki, you are to report for immediate debriefing, Soma commanded, his eyes completely ignoring Naruto. He then gestured to the still unconscious form of Xylos, who was being levitated by one of Naruto's shadow clones. The specimen is to be transferred to the 12th Division for containment and study. The outsider, he finally acknowledged Naruto, his voice dripping with contempt, is under arrest. Naruto's shadow clone dissipated, and Renji caught Xylos before he could fall. Arrest. Rukia stepped forward, her voice sharp. On what grounds? He completed the mission. The Urankar leader was neutralized. Lord Takayoshi laughed, a short, ugly bark. Neutralized. My dear lieutenant, the orders were for elimination. Your pet beast chose to defy a direct command from the Gotei 13, an act of open insurrection. We have multiple witnesses. He smirked. This is the end of your little experiment, Uzumaki. We finally have just cause. Cause for what? A parade. A lazy voice drawled. Kenpachi Zaraki stepped in front of Naruto, his massive frame a bulwark of unpredictable violence. He casually rested the massive blade of Nozarashi on his shoulder, its temporarily nullified section now slowly regaining its spiritual gleam. The kid fought well. He figured out how to beat the Taki one when I couldn't. And his little explosion ball thing was neat. He's with me. You got a problem with that? The sheer, unrestrained killing intent that rolled off Kenpachi made several of the Onmitsukido agents flinch. Soma, however, held his ground, his hand resting on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. This is not a matter for the 11th Division, Zaraki. This is a matter of military law. Everything's a matter for the 11th Division if it looks like it'll be a good fight, Kenpachi grinned. And you trying to arrest my new favorite toy looks like it might be a very good fight. The standoff was broken by the arrival of another captain. Kenshin Araki appeared in a silent flash of Shunpo, his immaculate Haori unstirred. His violet eyes surveyed the scene with a cold, detached authority. That's enough, Captain Zaraki, Kenshin said, his voice cutting through the tension. Your brand of barbarism is not required. Naruto Uzumaki's actions have consequences, and he will answer for them. But he will do so before the head captain and the assembly, not in a back alley brawl with the 2nd Division. He turned to Soma. Stand down, Captain Kasaragi. He is not a flight risk. I will personally escort him. It was a political masterstroke. Kenshin was asserting his authority, positioning himself as the voice of reason and tradition while simultaneously ensuring Naruto would face a full public tribunal, a stage perfectly set for Kenshin to decry him as a threat. Soma, outmaneuvered, gave a curt, angry nod and his forces parted. Come, Uzumaki, Kenshin said, the order clear in his polite tone. Your day of reckoning has arrived. The emergency session of the Gotei 13 was a far more tense and hostile affair than Naruto's first welcome. He stood alone in the center of the vast hall. The captains arrayed like judges and executioners. The unconscious Xylos lay on a Kido restraint pallet nearby, a piece of evidence in a trial that already felt decided. Renji and Rukia had given their reports. Renji's was factual, direct, and damning in its honesty. The leader was neutralized, but the order to execute was defied by Naruto Uzumaki. Rukia's was different. She defended Naruto's actions, citing the strategic value of a living prisoner and the possibility of a deeper conspiracy within Soul Society, a defense that earned her a look of glacial fury from her brother. Now, Kenshin Araki held the floor, his voice ringing with righteous conviction. "We are a society of laws," he declared, his gaze sweeping over his fellow captains. "Of oaths, we entrust our lives to the principle that an order given will be an order followed. Today, that sacred trust was broken. Naruto Uzumaki, an outsider with no understanding of our traditions or our sacrifices, placed his own misguided morality above the security of the Soul Society. He has proven what I have said from the beginning. He is an uncontrollable element, a force of chaos wearing a hero's mask. He must be contained, his powers sealed, before his next act of defiance costs us more than just a prisoner." The sentiment was echoed by several other captains. The room was turning against him. Even Yukitake looked troubled, his loyalty to his subordinate clashing with the gravity of the infraction. Head Captain Yamamoto finally spoke, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "Naruto Uzumaki, you have heard the accusation. You defied a lawful order during a critical mission. Explain yourself." Naruto had been silent throughout the proceedings, simply listening. He now met the head captain's gaze, his own eyes clear and steady. He did not look like a defendant. He looked like a man about to deliver a verdict of his own. "I did what was right," he said, his voice calm but resonating with an unshakable certainty. "And I did what was smart. You sent us to investigate a threat you didn't understand. This man," he gestured to Xylos, "is the key to understanding it." He spoke of a Shinigami research team, centuries ago, that discovered the existence of the Ordained. A team that tried to report their findings to Central 46. He paused, letting the words sink in before he delivered the killing blow. His gaze left Yamamoto and swept over the shadowy gallery where the members of Central 46 were observing. "He told me they were silenced, executed and erased from the records for the crime of telling the truth. You want to know why I didn't kill him? Because I'm starting to think he's not the real traitor in this room." A collective gasp went through the hall. It was a direct, explosive accusation against the highest governing body of the Soul Society. The members of Central 46 erupted into furious, indignant protests. "Insolence! He dares accuse us! This is treason!" Naruto's sage mode was active. He could feel the waves of emotion in the room. The shock, the anger, but from the gallery of Central 46, he felt something else, a spike of pure, unadulterated fear. A cold, slimy dread from a handful of the ancient, robed figures. He had hit the mark. "My decision saved a vital intelligence asset and exposed a rot that has been festering at the heart of your government for centuries," Naruto continued, his voice rising with power. "If that is a crime, then I am guilty. But you should be more worried about the enemies who are already inside your walls than the friend who was trying to help you." His speech had shattered the proceedings. The captains were now looking at each other, then at the sputtering members of Central 46, uncertainty and suspicion blooming in their eyes. The trial of Naruto Uzumaki had just become an inquest into the integrity of the entire Soul Society. Before Yamamoto could restore order, Captain Mayuri Kuritsuchi stepped forward, a disturbing, gleeful giggle escaping his lips. "Treason, schmezen. This is all wonderfully dramatic, but what I find most fascinating is the specimen itself." He gestured to Xylos. "Head Captain, this political squabbling is a waste of time. The prisoner should be turned over to the 12th Division immediately. I will peel back the layers of his mind and his body. I will give you the truth you seek, extracted with scientific precision." Yamamoto, his face a grim mask, seemed to see this as the only way to cut the Gordian knot Naruto had created. "Very well, Mayuri, he is yours. Find out what he knows." He turned his burning gaze back to Naruto. "As for you, Uzumaki, your fate is yet to be decided. You will be confined to the 13th Division barracks under guard until we have the truth." This session is adjourned. As the captains filed out, the air was thick with paranoia. Naruto had won a temporary victory, but he had made powerful, dangerous enemies. Rukia rushed to his side, her face pale. "Naruto, what have you done?" Accusing Central 46. "It's the truth," he said, his eyes still on the robed figures in the gallery. "And the truth is a weapon they're not used to fighting." At that very moment, in the quiet, Unassuming headquarters of the Kido Corps, a seated officer named Ren Hakone was finishing his shift. He was a mousy, forgettable man with graying hair and a perpetual look of weary diligence. No one ever gave him a second glance. He was part of the Seraite's bureaucratic furniture. He walked to a secluded relay terminal, a device used to monitor the integrity of the Shikanmaku barrier. His fingers danced over the Kido-based console, not with the movements of a technician, but with the arcane gestures of a forbidden rite. He pressed his palm to the console, and a faint, gray-purple light, the color of nullity, flared in his eyes for a bare instant. The council is divided. The sage has sown chaos. The moment is now, he whispered to the silent console. Miles away, at a specific, calculated point on the Seraite's great spiritual shield, a single, shimmering thread of energy unraveled. For less than a second, a hole no larger than a man flickered into existence. It was not a brute force entry. It was a key turning in a lock. And through that hole, the silent ones came. The first alarm wasn't a siren, it was a wave of profound wrongness that washed over the Seraite. It was a feeling of spatial distortion, of the world's fundamental rules being bent out of shape. Kenshin Araki was in his office, brooding over the day's events, when he felt it. The air in the room seemed to twist, the corner of his desk appearing several feet to the left of where it should have been. He was outside in a flash, his hand on his zanpakuto. Rukia Kuchiki felt it in his own way. The perfectly still surface of the pond in his garden rippled without a breeze, the reflection showing a sky that was the wrong color. Their target was not the barracks, not the divisions. It was a low, windowless building of ancient black wood that sat in the most heavily guarded and warded sector of the Seraite, the Dai-Reiki Shoko, the Great Spirit Book Gallery. The true library of souls. By the time Kenshin arrived, they were already there. 3 figures stood before the sealed entrance to the archives. They were not hollows. They were not Shinigami. They wore simple, gray cloaks, their faces hidden in shadow. But their very presence was an assault on the senses. The ground buckled around their feet, straight lines became curves, and the sound of Kenshin's approach seemed to die a few feet from his own ears. You will go no further, Kenshin declared, his spiritual pressure flaring like a sharp, brilliant diamond. In the name of the Gotei 13, surrender. One of the figures turned. It had no face, only a swirling void beneath its hood. It raised a hand, and the very air between it and Kenshin seemed to solidify, becoming a wall of warped, visible space. Tenkyu no feud. Kenshin released his shikai, the brush of light forming in his hand. He painted with furious speed. Hado number 90, Kurohitsugi, the ultimate offensive Kido. A massive black coffin of gravity and spiritual energy erupted, intending to encase and crush the intruder. But as it formed, the angles of the coffin bent, the straight lines warped, and it collapsed in on itself, unraveling into harmless particles before it ever reached its target. Kenshin stared in horror. His Kido, his perfect, precise art, had been unmade. A second figure moved, gliding over the ground. It passed Byakuya, who had just arrived, as if he were a statue. Byakuya's response was instantaneous. Bankai, Senbon Sakura Kujiyoshi. 1,000 blades rose from the ground, a swirling storm of pink petals that could shred a mountain. The storm converged on the gray-cloaked being. But the blades passed right through it, striking the far wall. The being was insubstantial, a ghost, a living paradox. It continued on its path to the archive doors. This is impossible, Byakuya breathed, his perfect composure finally fracturing. They do not obey the laws of spiritual matter. Naruto was halfway across the Seraite when he felt it. His sage mode registered the attack not as a spike of Ryutsu, but as a tear in the fabric of the world itself. The natural energy was screaming. He didn't wait for orders. He simply moved, a golden streak against the sky. He arrived to a scene of chaos. Kenshin was desperately unleashing spell after spell, each one dissolving into nothing. Byakuya's Bankai was a useless, beautiful storm. The third sea-loaked figure had turned its attention to Kenshin and was advancing slowly. It reached out, and the space around Kenshin began to contract, to fold in on itself, preparing to crush him into a single, dimensionless point. Get away from him. Quote. The roar was primal. Naruto descended from the sky like a meteor. He didn't use a Rasengan. He opened his mouth and a small, impossibly dense sphere of black and purple energy formed, a Bijudama. He didn't fire it, he infused it with natural energy, causing it to swirl and flatten, the shriek of a Recentrican combining with the absolute destructive power of a tailed beast bomb. Sage art. Tailed beast bomb Recentrican. He hurled it. It did not fly straight. It warped the space around it as it traveled. The reality-bending soldier turned to face it, raising a hand to unmake it. It couldn't. Naruto's attack wasn't just energy. It was a fusion of life, nature, and a power that predated the Soul Society's rules. It was a physical violation of reality itself. The soldier's nullification field wavered, and the spinning sphere of destruction struck it dead center. The resulting explosion was utterly silent. There was no sound, no fire. Just a Florida's H of black light and a sphere of spatial distortion that expanded, consumed the gray-cloaked soldier, and then imploded, leaving behind nothing but a lingering shimmer in the air and a perfectly circular crater in the ground. The other two soldiers froze, their faceless heads turning to Naruto. They had encountered a force that could harm them. Just then, Rukia arrived, her blade drawn. "Brother, Captain Araki." One of the remaining soldiers immediately changed its target. It abandoned the archive door and moved towards her, its speed unnatural, flowing over the ground like spilled ink. Byakuya saw it. His analytical mind, which had been struggling to comprehend this new enemy, was suddenly wiped clean, replaced by a single, primal instinct. Protect. He abandoned his Bankai's offense and used Shunpo, appearing between Rukia and the advancing soldier in a flicker of movement. The soldier thrust its hand forward, a simple gesture. Byakuya met it with his blade. The moment the cloaked hand touched Senbon Sakura, the blade began to dissolve into dust. The soldier's attack continued, its fingers passing through the disintegrating steel, aimed at Byakuya's heart. He couldn't dodge in time. With a grim certainty, he shifted his body, taking the full force of the blow in his left shoulder and side. There was no blood. Where the soldier's hand passed through him, Byakuya's body simply unraveled. His Shihakusho, his flesh, his very spiritual essence were being turned into drifting particles of nothingness. He gasped, a strangled, agonized sound, and collapsed to his knees, his face a mask of shock and pain. "Brother!" Rukia's scream tore through the air. Naruto saw it all. He saw Byakuya fall. He saw the cold, impassive way the soldier turned from the crippled captain to continue its advance on Rukia. And something inside him snapped. The calm, controlled sage was gone. The golden aura around him was consumed, swallowed by a roiling, volcanic tide of crimson red. A sinister, nine-tailed silhouette of pure, malevolent chakra flared behind him, and his eyes, once the color of the sky, burned with the feral red of a predator. The temperature of the air plummeted, replaced by a suffocating, murderous pressure that was pure, undiluted killing intent. It was the rage of the nine-tailed fox, fully unleashed and focused into a single point of absolute fury. "I told you," he snarled. His voice a guttural echo of his own and a beast's, "I told him." He raised a hand, and a massive, spectral claw of red chakra materialized, lashing out with impossible speed. To never use her. The chakra claw struck the soldier that had wounded Byakuya. There was no complex interaction. Only overwhelming, primal force. The soldier was smashed into the side of the archive building with enough power to crack the ancient warded stone. The second remaining soldier, seeing this display of raw, chaotic power, seemed to make a decision. It shimmered, its form dissolving, and vanished. The attack was over. The crimson aura around Naruto receded, but the red in his eyes remained. He flashed to Rukia's side, standing over the fallen, grievously wounded form of her brother. He looked down at the man who had threatened him, who had held his honor in contempt, and who had just sacrificed himself to save his sister. The rage faded, replaced by a grim, heavy resolve. The Seraite had been breached. Its defenses had failed. Its captains had been proven powerless. Its laws had been broken. And in the ensuing chaos, Naruto Uzumaki, the outsider, the anomaly, was the only thing left standing between the Soul Society and the silent, unmaking void. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Beneath the Sarakiku. The aftermath of the attack was not a storm of panicked shouting, but a stunned, profound silence. The Seraite, a fortress that had stood inviolable for 1,000 years, had been breached as easily as a paper screen. A captain of the Gotei 13, the head of the great Kuchiki clan, lay dying. And the only reason the devastation wasn't worse was because of the very outsider they had been trying to condemn. The silence was heavy with the weight of these truths, and it was more damning than any accusation. The 4th Division barracks became the eye of this silent hurricane. Captain Retsu Unohana, her usual gentle smile replaced by a mask of grim, absolute focus, directed the healing efforts. The air in the primary treatment ward was thick with the green glow of healing keto and the scent of medicinal herbs, a fragile defense against the smell of ozone and nothingness that clung to Byakuya's wound. Rukia stood by the doorway, unable to take another step. She felt frozen, a spectator to her own nightmare. Her brother lay on a raised pallet, his eyes closed, his face as pale as winter snow. The left side of his body, from his shoulder down to his hip, was a horrifying spectacle. It wasn't bleeding, it wasn't burned, it was simply gone. And the edges of the wound were not clean, they were frayed, shimmering. As if his very existence were slowly unraveling into dust. It's not a conventional injury. Unohana's voice was low, clinical, but laced with a gravity that chilled Rukia to the bone. She was speaking to Naruto, who stood on the other side of the pallet, his expression a mixture of intense concentration and deep concern. A blade cuts. Keto burns or binds. This is an attack on the soul's information. It's not just erasing his reishi, it's erasing the very concept of his body in that space. Our healing keto can regenerate flesh, but it cannot regenerate something that the universe itself has been told is no longer there. So you can't heal him, Rukia stated, her voice hollow. We are slowing the degradation, Unohana corrected gently, her hands glowing with an incredibly potent green energy as she worked. But it is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. We are merely buying time. Naruto had been silent, his sage mode active, his senses extended not outwards, but inwards, focused entirely on the wound. He could feel what Unohana was describing. It was a void, a pocket of nullity that was actively devouring the life force around it. But beneath that void, he could still feel Byakuya's life force, his chakra signature. It was faint, flickering like a dying candle, but it was there. There's still an anchor, Naruto said suddenly. His core, his spirit is still fighting. He looked at Unohana. Your healing keto is spiritual energy. It's what their power is designed to unmake. You're feeding the void. Unohana's hand faltered for a barest fraction of a second. What do you propose, Uzumaki? That we do nothing. No, he said. We give it something else to eat. He stepped forward, placing his hand a few inches above the wound. My energy isn't spiritual, it's physical, it's life force. Let me try something. Before Unohana could protest, a soft, golden light, purer and warmer than any healing keto, emanated from Naruto's palm. He wasn't trying to heal the wound. He was infusing Byakuya's entire body with his own life energy, carefully, gently. He wasn't patching the hole, he was reinforcing the bucket. The effect was visible. The shimmering, unraveling edges of the wound stabilized. The slow, inexorable decay halted. Byakuya's breathing, which had been shallow and ragged, deepened slightly. It wasn't a cure, it was a stasis. Unohana stared, her centuries of medical knowledge rendered obsolete in a single moment. How? He's stable, for now, Naruto said, sweat beading on his brow. The effort was a massive drain, like pouring his own life into a bottomless pit. But the void is still there. If I stop, it will start again. He looked at Rukia, at the raw, naked guilt and fear in her eyes. He did this for you. He'll keep fighting. Quote, the words were meant to be a comfort, but for Rukia, they were a fresh twist of the knife. He did this for you. The truth of it was an unbearable weight. She turned and fled the room. Unable to breathe, unable to watch. Naruto found her hours later. The sun had set, and the manicured gardens of the Kuchiki manor were bathed in the cold, pale light of the moon. It was the same place where Byakuya had interrogated him, a place of suffocating tradition. Tonight, it was a sanctuary of grief. She was sitting on the edge of the Ingawa, staring at the perfectly still pond. Her arms wrapped around herself as if to hold the pieces of her crumbling world together. He approached quietly and sat down beside her, not speaking, simply sharing the silence. For a long time, The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in a phantom breeze. "It's my fault," she finally whispered, her voice rough with unshed tears. "He was never supposed to be there. I was the target. He stepped in front of me. All those years, all the distance he put between us, the coldness, I thought he resented me. That he blamed me for my sister's death." She looked up, her eyes shimmering with a pain that was more than just grief. It was the agony of a lifetime of misunderstanding. "But when he fell, when he looked at me, I didn't see the head of the Kuchiki clan. I just saw my brother. And he was trying to save me." "I know," Naruto said softly. "How could you know?" she snapped, a flash of her old defensiveness breaking through. "You don't know anything about him, about us. I know what it's like to try and save someone who pushes you away," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze distant, fixed on a memory from another world. "I spent years chasing after a brother who was lost in darkness. I fought him, I bled for him, I nearly died for him. And every time, he told me to leave him alone. That our bond was a weakness. But I never believed him." He turned to her, his blue eyes holding a profound, weary empathy. "Sometimes, the people who love you the most have the hardest time showing it. Especially when they're afraid. He wasn't pushing you away because he hated you, Rukia. He was pushing you away because he was terrified of losing you, just like he lost her." His words pierced through her grief, landing with the simple, devastating power of truth. She stared at him, seeing for the first time the deep, ancient scars of loss that he carried beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't just a force of nature. He was a survivor, just like her. A single tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "What if he doesn't wake up?" she asked, the question a fragile, terrified thing in the quiet night. "We don't think about that yet," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "We just focus on today. On the fact that he's still here. He's still fighting." He had spent the entire day pouring his energy into Byakuya, rotating with Unohana. He was exhausted, she could see it in the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. He had saved a man who despised him, defended her from an enemy she couldn't see, and now he was sitting here, trying to piece her shattered heart back together. She looked down at her own hands, which were clenched into tight fists in her lap. They were trembling. Without a word, he reached over and gently covered her fists with his own hand. His was large, warm, and calloused from a lifetime of fighting. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was an anchor, a simple, profound statement. "You are not alone in this. He's going to be okay," Naruto said, as if trying to convince himself as much as her. "We'll find a way." The fragile peace of the moment was shattered by the appearance of a hell butterfly. Its black wings fluttering as it delivered its message in a child's voice. "Head Captain Yamamoto requests the presence of Naruto Uzumaki." Immediately, the summons was not to the assembly hall, but to the head captain's private war room, a chamber deep beneath the 1st Division barracks that had not been used in centuries. The walls were lined with ancient maps of all the realms, and the air was heavy with the ozone of old Kido wards. Yamamoto was not alone. The shadowy, robed figures of the Central 46 Council were present, their faces hidden, their spiritual pressures a discordant chorus of fear and anger. Captains Yukitake, Kiraku, and Unohana were also there, their expressions grim. This was not a trial. It was a council of war. "Uzumaki," Yamamoto began, his voice gravelly. "Your accusation against Central 46 was inflammatory. However, the subsequent attack on the Great Spirit Book Gallery lends it a credence we can no longer ignore." One of the Central 46 figures slammed his fist on the table. "This is an outrage. We are the victims here. This, outsiders' wild claims have undermined the very authority of the Seraite." Naruto didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on Yamamoto. "They came for the archives. Not to destroy them, but to retrieve something. The fact that they knew what to target, and how to bypass your barrier to do it, means they had help from the inside. From someone with knowledge of your deepest secrets." He let his gaze drift to the robed figures. "Someone like you." He activated his sage mode. The orange markings appeared around his eyes, and the world resolved itself into a sea of energy signatures. He could feel the auras of everyone in the room. Most were a mix of anger, duty, and concern. but from 3 of the Central 46 members. He felt it again. That cold, slimy, terrified spike of deceit. You, Naruto said, pointing directly at the one who had just spoken. And you. The lie is a bitter taste in your soul. I can feel it. The accused figures recoiled as if struck. Lies. Slander from a beast. Enough. Yamamoto's voice boomed, shaking the very stones of the room. He turned his ancient, burning eyes on the 3 figures. The time for deception is over. Our home has been violated. A captain lies at death's door. For centuries, you have governed from the shadows, your word is law. Now, in the face of a threat that can unmake our reality, you will speak the truth. What is the Soul King? And what do the ordained want with him? A heavy, terrified silence descended. The other members of Central 46 looked at the accused 3. Their own suspicion now a palpable force. Finally, one of them, an old, quavering voice, spoke. The Soul King is not a god, he admitted, the words a heresy that made the air crackle. Not in the way we have led the people to believe. He is a prison and a key. 1,000,000 years ago, another confessed, before the 3 realms were separated, existence was a howling, chaotic sea of souls. There was no life or death, only endless flux. The Soul King was a being of unimaginable power who could impose order on that chaos. Our ancestors, the first Shinigami, did not worship him. They fought him. They defeated him. Shunsui Kyoraku's lazy demeanor vanished, his eyes sharp and focused. Defeated him. Then who, or what, is in the palace? Our ancestors could not destroy him. The 3rd figure whispered, his voice trembling. To do so would be to return the universe to its primordial chaos. So they did the only thing they could. They dismembered him. They sealed his living, conscious body in a crystal prison to act as a linchpin, a plug in the cosmic drain. His limbs were scattered, becoming the foundations of our world. The royal guard were not created to protect a god. They are the jailers of a cosmic horror. This is the great lie. The original sin upon which the entire soul society is built. The revelation was a bomb that shattered 1,000,000 years of dogma. Yukitake looked ill. Shunsui's face was a grim, unreadable mask. And the ordained. Naruto pressed, the pieces finally clicking into place. They are fanatics who worship the primordial chaos, the councilman explained. His voice breaking. They call the Soul King, the great prisoner. They do not seek to kill him. They seek to release him. To use his power to shatter the linchpin and let all of existence, every soul, every world, be devoured by the chaos from which it was born. They believe it is a purification. A return to grace. Now they understood. The sheer, existential horror of the enemy's goal was laid bare. The information in the archives, Unohana began, contained the location of his sealed limbs, the keys to weakening his prison, the councilman finished, his voice collapsing into a sob. They have what they need to begin. Naruto looked at the pathetic, terrified old men who had guarded this terrible secret. He felt no pity. Their lies, their obsession with order at any cost, had left the soul society blind and vulnerable. This changes everything, Shunsui said, his voice low. The war is not at our doorstep. It is in our house. And the very foundation is a lie. Naruto left the war room, the heavy weight of cosmic truth settling on his shoulders. He walked through the now tense and paranoid streets of the Seraite, back towards the Kuchiki manor. He had the answers he sought, but they brought no comfort. He found Rukia where he had left her, in the moonlit garden. She looked up as he approached, her eyes questioning. He didn't need to say anything. She could see it on his face. "It's bad, isn't it?" she asked quietly. "It's worse," he said, sitting down beside her again. He didn't tell her about the Soul King. He didn't tell her about the cosmic prison. The burden of that knowledge was too great to share, not now. Instead, he told her the one truth that mattered in that moment. "They're not just trying to conquer the soul society," he said. "They're trying to erase it. Everything. Us." She absorbed that, her gaze turning to the pale, emotionless moon. For a long time, she was silent. Then she turned to him, her expression no longer one of grief, but of a quiet, fierce resolve he had never seen in her before. "Then we have to stop them," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. An oath. He looked at her, at The strength forged in the crucible of her pain, and he saw a kindred spirit. A warrior. A woman who, when faced with the end of everything, chose to stand and fight. Yeah, he said softly. We do. In the quiet of the garden, surrounded by the ghosts of a dying tradition and the threat of a coming apocalypse, their shared promise became a silent, unbreakable bond. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Her breath hitched. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the few inches of space between them. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She closed her eyes and met him halfway. The kiss was not passionate or desperate. It was gentle, hesitant, a quiet affirmation in a world of screaming chaos. It was the taste of moonlight and tears, of shared loss and a burgeoning, impossible hope. When they parted, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They simply sat together, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what horrors they would have to face. But as they watched the unblinking moon begin its slow descent, they knew one thing for certain. They would not face it alone. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Traitor's Price. The Seraite was a city holding its breath. The revelations from the secret war council had not been made public, but the truth had a way of seeping into the air, poisoning the atmosphere. A palpable paranoia had descended upon the Gotei 13. Patrols were doubled, then tripled. Shinigami who had served side by side for centuries now exchanged wary, suspicious glances. Keto barriers, usually invisible, now shimmered with a constant, defensive hum around critical structures. Every shadow was a potential hiding place for an enemy who looked just like them. The great lie had been exposed to the leadership, and the entire system felt like it was beginning to fracture under the weight. In this city of escalating fear, Kenshin A. Reiki's personal world had been shattered. His entire life had been built on a foundation of absolutes: order, law, tradition, the sanctity of the Gotei 13 and Central 46. He was the perfect product of that system, its most ardent defender. Now, the foundation had been revealed as sand, and the system was infested with traitors. The enemy was not an external force to be repelled, but an internal cancer to be excised. The orderly, black and white world he had championed had dissolved into a terrifying, chaotic gray. And at the center of this new, horrifying reality stood the one man he despised most, Naruto Uzumaki. The very embodiment of the chaos he feared, who had somehow become the only person to see the truth. He found Naruto not in the 13th Division barracks, but on the roof of the 4th Division. Sitting with his legs dangling over the edge, looking out over the city. A constant, gentle stream of golden energy flowed from Naruto's body down into the building below, a silent, life-giving IV drip for the wounded captain he had once considered a rival. Kenshin landed on the roof with a soundless flicker of shunpo. His movements were as precise as ever, but they were tight. Coiled with a rage that had no clear target. Uzumaki, he said, his voice clipped and formal. Naruto didn't turn. Captain Araki, come to enjoy the view. It's a lot more tense than it was last week. I am not here for pleasantries, Kenshin stated, walking to stand beside him, his gaze fixed on the Seraite below. I have spent the last 12 hours reviewing every mission report, every patrol log, every communication intercept for the last 50 years. I have cross-referenced the service records of every member of the Keto Corps in Central 46. I have found nothing. The traitor is a ghost. That's because you're looking for a footprint, Naruto said, finally turning to look at the prodigy captain. Kenshin's face was pale, his violet eyes burning with a frustrated, sleepless fire. He looked like a man trying to solve an impossible equation. You're trying to find a flaw in the system. But the traitor isn't breaking the system. He is the system. Kenshin's jaw tightened. Your cryptic pronouncements are not helpful. It's not a riddle, Naruto said, standing up. I felt it on Lord Takayoshi. A taint, a connection to the enemy. But it's not just him. I felt it on 3 members of Central 46. It's a faint energy signature, cold and empty. It's how they communicate, how they coordinate. It's the thread that connects them. You're looking for evidence of a crime. I can feel the soul of the criminal. A long, tense silence stretched between them. The two men were polar opposites. Kenshin, the man of systems, logic, and order. Naruto, the man of instinct, emotion, and chaotic power. And for the first time, Kenshin was forced to admit that his way had failed. "What you propose is unorthodox," Kenshin said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "To hunt a man based on a feeling. It's more than a feeling," Naruto countered. "It's the same energy their soldiers used. The same energy I felt from their god. It's their signature. I can track it, but I don't know this place. I don't know who belongs where. Who has access to what. I can find the what. I need you for the who, where, and why." He met Kenshin's gaze, his expression deadly serious. "Your world is breaking, Captain. You can either stand on the pieces, reciting the old rules, or you can help me hold it together." Kenshin stared at him, a war raging behind his eyes. To accept Naruto's help was to admit his own way was inferior. To rely on this creature of instinct was anathema to his very being. But the alternative was to sit by while his beloved soul society was eaten from within. His pride was a small price to pay for the preservation of order. "Very well," he conceded, the words stiff. "A temporary alliance, for the sole purpose of eliminating the internal threat." He held out a hand, not for a handshake, but to display a complex Kido seal shimmering in his palm. "This is a communication glyph. It will allow us to remain in constant, silent contact. We will combine your senses with my strategic analysis." Naruto just nodded. "Good. We have the bloodhound and the cage builder. Now we just need some bait." The plan was simple, elegant, and audacious. An emergency summons was sent to all senior officers of the Kido Corps and the Central 46 administrative staff. The summons, penned by Kenshin Araki himself, announced a breakthrough, a new, wide-field sensory barrier, BA. Said on Captain Kuritsuchi's analysis of the nullity energy, was being developed. When activated, this conceptual ward would be able to detect the unique, reality-warping signature of the Ordained's agents anywhere within the Seraite. The announcement was a lie, but it was a lie designed to force the traitor's hand. The meeting was to be held in a secure chamber within the Kido Corps headquarters. The location was critical. It was the nerve center of the Seraite's entire defensive network. Naruto and Kenshin stood in a darkened observation room, watching the attendees file into the meeting hall through a one-way Kido screen. Kenshin was a statue of coiled tension, his eyes scanning every face, analyzing every posture. Naruto was perfectly calm, his eyes closed, his senses extended. He wasn't watching the people. He was listening to the energy. "There," Naruto whispered, his eyes snapping open. "The old man in the back. Brown robes. The one who looks like he's about to fall asleep." Kenshin focused on the individual. Ren Hakone, 4th seat of the Archives Division. He's a logistician, a glorified clerk. He's been in that post for 200 years. It's impossible. The Toin T on him is stronger than any of the others, Naruto stated, his voice certain. He's not just a sympathizer. He's a conduit. The bait is taken. He knows he has to stop this new ward from ever going online. He'll make his move the moment the meeting ends. They didn't have to wait long. The meeting was a masterpiece of bureaucratic misdirection, led by a Kido Corps lieutenant loyal to Kenshin. After an hour of meaningless technical jargon, it was dismissed. The officers filed out, grumbling about the waste of time. But Ren Hakone did not leave with the others. He slipped away down a side corridor, moving with a quiet, unobtrusive purpose that belied his feeble appearance. "He's heading for the primary energy core," Kenshin hissed, already moving. "If he sabotages it, he could destabilize the entire Shikanmaku." They followed, two silent shadows in the labyrinthine corridors of the Kido Corps. Hakone moved with an unnerving familiarity, accessing restricted areas with override codes that a 4th seat should not possess. He finally arrived in the heart of the complex, a colossal, cathedral-like chamber. In the center, a pillar of pure, white spiritual energy, thick as an ancient tree, pulsed with a deep, rhythmic hum, stretching from the floor to the impossibly high ceiling. This was the central spiritual core, the battery that powered every ward and barrier in the Seraite. Hakone walked to the base of the pillar and placed his hand upon a control console. He wasn't trying to smash it. He was chanting, a low, guttural language that was not the tongue of Kido. The air grew thick, and the pure white light of the core began to flicker, veins of sick, gray-purple energy crawling up its length like poison ivy. Your tenure as a clerk is over, Hakone, Kenshin's voice rang out, sharp as shattering glass. The old man turned, and the feeble, weary expression was gone. His eyes glowed with the cold, fanatical light of a true believer. The nullity taint around him was no longer faint, it was a visible, shimmering aura of distortion. Captain Araki, and the beast, Hakone said, his voice a dry, reptilian rasp. I am honored. You were just in time to witness the beginning of the great purification. By corrupting the very heart of the Seraite. Kenshin snarled, his hand on his zanpakuto. This is not purification. It is sacrilege. Hakone laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Sacrilege. You stand in a temple built upon a lie, powered by the stolen life force of a chained god, and you speak to me of sacrilege. He spread his arms wide. You Shinigami and your precious order are a disease. A fleeting, chaotic anomaly in the perfect, silent void of what was. The Harbinger is the cure. And I am proud to be its humble instrument. He slammed his palm down on the console. The gray-purple veins in the energy core flared, and the entire room groaned. The Kido wards on the walls sparked and twisted, their geometric patterns warping into nightmarish shapes. The very room was turning against them. Your Kido is useless here, Captain. Hakone cackled. I control the source. Every spell you cast will be unmade before it is even born. Kenshin didn't hesitate. Tenkyu no feud. His Shikai formed. But the moment the brush of light appeared, it flickered violently, its connection to the ambient reishi unstable. He tried to paint a binding spell, but the kanji dissolved into smoke. Hakone was right. I told you I don't use spells, Naruto said, and charged. Hakone sneered, raising a hand. A section of the floor rippled, rising up like a wave of solid stone to intercept Naruto. Naruto didn't slow down. He punched it. A shockwave of pure physical force, augmented by chakra, shattered the stone wave into gravel. He leapt through the debris, a Rasengan already forming in his hand. Hakone's eyes widened in alarm. He touched the energy core again, and a shield of pure nullity, the same warped space the ordained soldiers used, materialized in front of him. Naruto's Rasengan slammed into it. The two energies met in a screeching, violent struggle. The shield held, but the force of the impact sent cracks racing through the floor. While he's distracted, Kenshin said, his mind working with cold, tactical clarity. He appeared beside Naruto, his flickering Shikai held ready. He wasn't trying to cast a grand spell. He began painting a series of tiny, incredibly complex, interlocking symbols directly onto the surface of Naruto's churning Rasengan. It was an act of impossible precision and control. What are you doing? Naruto grunted, pushing against the shield. Your technique is a blunt instrument, Kenshin replied, his focus absolute. I am giving it a key. He was weaving a Kido concept, a disruptive, unraveling frequency, directly into the physical matrix of the Rasengan. He was combining their two opposing philosophies of combat into a single, hybrid attack. He finished the final symbol and slapped Naruto's shoulder. Now, Naruto roared, pouring every ounce of his strength into the attack. The Rasengan, now glowing with an intricate, pulsing network of Kenshin's Kido glyphs, spun with a new, terrifying frequency. It did not smash the nullity shield. It resonated with it, found its flawed, unnatural frequency, and tore it apart from the inside out. The shield shattered like glass. Hakone cried out as the hybrid attack slammed into him, throwing him back against the corrupted energy core. The power of the blow, combined with the unraveling Kido, was too much. The fanatical light in his eyes faded, replaced by shock, and then nothing. The gray-purple veins in the core receded, and the pillar of energy returned to its pure, white state. The traitor was defeated. They stood over his fallen form, breathing heavily. A strange, new respect passed between them in the silent, humming chamber. His control, his perversion of Kido, Kenshin murmured, stunned. It was masterful, a genius, wasted on a nihilistic death cult. Naruto knelt beside Hakone. The man was dying, a faint, rattling breath escaping his lips. But as he died, a serene, ecstatic smile spread across his face. Fools, he whispered, his eyes unfocused, staring at a vision only he could see. You have only delayed the glorious silence. The Harbinger does not need to break the chains, one by one. His voice grew stronger, filled with a terrifying, prophetic joy. He will gather his power in the place between worlds, where time and space bleed. He will bring the Dongai itself crashing down upon the king's palace. He won't just release the Soul King, he will wear its power like a crown, and become its new, silent heart. The god of nothingness will reign. With a final, ecstatic sigh, Ren Hakone died, the smile still frozen on his face. Naruto and Kenshin stared at each other, the full, horrifying weight of the traitor's last words sinking in. The Dongai, the precipice world, not just a path, but a weapon. A staging ground for the final assault on the Soul King's palace. He means to bring the entire dimension down on top of us, Kenshin said, his voice a bare whisper. The sheer power required, it's unthinkable. Unthinkable is their specialty, Naruto said grimly, standing up. The hunt was over. The traitor had paid his price. But the information he had provided painted a picture of an apocalypse beyond their darkest imaginings. He looked at Kenshin, the prodigy of order. His reluctant ally. Get your Gotei 13 ready, Captain. The real battle is about to begin. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The God of Nothingness. There was a day of silence. Not peace, but the heavy, charged quiet of a world bracing for impact. The traitor was dead, but his final, ecstatic prophecy had slithered into the minds of the Gotei 13's leadership, a poison for which there was no antidote. They knew what was coming. The Dongai itself, the rushing, timeless corridor between worlds, was to be weaponized. The final battle would not be for the Soul Society, but for the very concept of the Soul King's palace, the linchpin of reality. In the sterile, quiet halls of the 4th Division, Naruto sat by Rukia Kuchiki's bedside. For 3 days, he had poured a constant, steady stream of his life force into the wounded captain, a human dialysis machine filtering out the encroaching void. Rukia was awake, his face ashen, his breathing shallow, but the slow, inexorable decay of his soul had been halted. He had not spoken a word. He simply watched Naruto with those cool, gray eyes, the aristocratic disdain now replaced by a complex, unreadable mixture of grudging respect and profound confusion. Rukia stood by the window, looking out at a sky that seemed too bright, too normal. She and Naruto had barely spoken of the kiss in the garden. It was a fragile, perfect moment. A candle flame they were both afraid to acknowledge for fear the coming storm would extinguish it. But the bond it had forged was an unspoken current that now flowed between them, a silent source of strength. You have exhausted yourself for my sake. Rukia's voice was a dry rasp, the first words he had spoken. He was looking at Naruto. Why? Naruto didn't look away from the window. Because you're her brother. The answer was that simple. There was no complex morality, no strategic calculation. It was a matter of family. Rukia was silent for a long moment, processing this. In his world, actions were dictated by duty, honor, and law. Naruto's were dictated by personal bonds, a logic that was both alien and undeniably powerful. Rukia said, his gaze shifting to his sister. Come here. She moved to his side, her heart aching at his weakness. He slowly, painfully, raised his uninjured hand and placed it on her head, a gesture of affection she hadn't felt from him since she was a small child. I have failed you, he whispered, the admission costing him more than the physical pain. My pride, my adherence to a law I now know was built on a lie, it blinded me. I tried to protect our family's honor, when I should have been protecting you. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw not the cold captain, but the weary, grieving man who had lost one sister and was terrified of losing another. Do not die, he commanded, but it was not an order. It was a plea. He then looked past her, to Naruto. Keep her safe. It was not a request. It was a transfer of responsibility. An acknowledgement from one warrior to another. It was Rukia Kuchiki's surrender. Before Naruto could answer, it began. It was not a sound. It was not a tremor. It was a fundamental lurch in the fabric of reality. For a single, nauseating second, every straight line in the seraite seemed to curve, every soul felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the universe had skipped a beat. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his sage mode flaring to life. It's here. They ran outside. The sky was cracking. High above the central spire of the seraite, a jagged, Earring fissure tore across the dome of the heavens. It was not the angry, violent black of a Garganta. This was a wound in space-time itself, and through it, they could see the chaotic, rushing blues and purples of the precipice world. The timeless, lawless expanse of the Dongai. The fissure widened, the cracking sound not a noise that traveled through the air, but a psychic shriek that echoed dire. CTLY in the minds of every soul in the city. From the heart of that fissure, a figure descended. It had no features. It was a humanoid silhouette of perfect, light-devouring black, a hole cut in the shape of a man. It did not radiate spiritual pressure, it radiated its absence. The very air around it grew still and cold, the reishi particles themselves seeming to cease their eternal dance. Where its feet touched the sky, the blue began to fade to a uniform, empty gray. This was the Harbinger, the god of nothingness. Its presence was an immediate, passive assault. Shinigami standing in the cower. Yards below felt their thoughts begin to fray. A fond memory of a loved one would suddenly feel distant, hollow. The name of a treasured Kido spell would slip from their minds. The conceptual weight of their own existence began to feel thin. All captains. To me, Yamamoto's roar was a physical force, a desperate attempt to impose order on a world that was dissolving into chaos. This is the final battle. Defend the Seraite. Defend the balance. For the Gotei 13, the response was immediate. From every corner of the city, streaks of light converged on the central plaza beneath the descending void. Kenpachi arrived with a guttural laugh, his bloodlust a roaring fire against the encroaching cold. Shunsui and Yukitake appeared side by side, their usual calm replaced by a grim, deadly focus. Kenshin Araki took his place, his face a mask of cold fury. Toshiro Hitsugaya, his childlike features set in a scowl of pure determination, drew his blade. Even Byakuya, leaning heavily on Renji for support, his wound hastily bound, materialized with the last of his strength, his Zanpakuto in hand. They were the most powerful beings in the Soul Society. They were legends, gods among souls. And they were about to be rendered utterly obsolete. Let's give this thing a proper welcome. Kenpachi bellowed, pouring every ounce of his monstrous spiritual pressure into his blade. Drink, Nozarashi. He unleashed a wave of golden energy. A slash so vast and powerful it could cleave a continent. It tore through the air, a roaring testament to pure, destructive force. The slash reached the Harbinger. And vanished. It did not impact. It was not blocked or deflected. The wave of golden energy simply ceased to be. It was erased from existence a few feet from the Harbinger's silent form. Kenpachi's grin froze on his face. It cannot be fought with Ryutsu, Kenshin stated, his analytical mind fighting against the tide of conceptual decay. It unmakes it. We must use a different approach. He raised his hand, his Shikai already active. Bakudo number 99, Part 2. Banken, the ultimate binding spell, spiritual fabric, woven from his own Raryoku, erupted from the ground, wrapping around the Harbinger. Followed by immense spears of steel that sought to impale it. The fabric shredded into nothing. The spears dissolved into dust. Bankai, Daigure and Hirenmaru, Hitsugaya roared, transforming into a winged creature of ice. The temperature of the entire plaza plummeting to absolute zero. A colossal dragon of ice soared upwards, intending to encase the Harbinger in a prison of eternal frost. The dragon was unmade mid-flight, its frozen form sublimating into nothingness. It was a massacre of their power. One by one, the captains unleashed their ultimate techniques, their Bankai, the culmination of centuries of training and battle. And one by one, their attacks were effortlessly, silently erased. Byakuya's storm of a million cherry blossoms. Shunsui's games of shadow and death. Unohana's river of acid. All of it was consumed by the silent, encroaching void. The Harbinger had not moved. It had not attacked. It was simply descending, and its passive, unmaking aura was growing stronger. He conceptual fraying spreading through the city. Naruto and Rukia arrived on the battlefield, landing in the center of the beleaguered captains. Naruto's entire body was alight with the golden fire of his ultimate sage mode. A beacon of pure life that pushed back against the encroaching nothingness. It's no good, he yelled over the psychic shriek of the cracking sky. You're trying to destroy it, but it's a concept, not a person. You can't kill nothing. You're just feeding it your power. Then what do we do? Boy! Yamamoto growled, his ancient body crackling with the flames of his Zanpakuto, Ryujin Jaka. Do we stand here and allow our world to be unwritten? No, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the silent, descending god. We give it something it can't erase. He turned to the other captains, his voice ringing with an authority none of them could deny. I am the only one whose power isn't based on reishi. My life energy, the energy of nature itself, is its antithesis. I can fight it, I can become an anchor to hold reality together. But I can't do it alone. I can't hurt it while I'm holding the world on my shoulders. His eyes found Rukia's. That's where you come in. Rukia stared at him, her heart pounding. Me, what can I do? Your power, he said, his voice intense. Soda no Shirayuki. Its true nature isn't ice. It's stillness. It brings matter to a stop at a conceptual level. Absolute zero isn't just cold, it's the cessation of all motion. All energy. The Harbinger's power is to unmake. Your power is to make things be still. Do you see? You might be the only one who can create a weakness. You can't kill it, but you might be able to force a moment of stasis on it. A single second where its power to unmake is frozen. And that's the opening I need. The captains stared, a dawning understanding on their faces. It was an insane, desperate gambit, a plan based on a philosophical interpretation of their own powers. But it was the only plan they had left. We will buy you your chance, Kenshin Araki said, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. He looked at Naruto, the man he had once called a beast, and gave a sharp, respectful nod. We will hold the line. We'll give you the best damn opening you've ever seen. Kenpachi grinned, his excitement reignited by this new, impossible challenge. Naruto nodded. He looked at Rukia, a world of trust and fear passing between them in a single glance. He closed his eyes and brought his hands together. Kurama. The world exploded in a tsunami of golden chakra. A colossal avatar, a nine-tailed fox made of pure, sun-bright energy, materialized around Naruto, towering over the buildings of the Seraite. But this was not the raging beast of old. Its energy was calm, controlled, life-affirming. It was not a weapon of destruction. It was a shield for the world. The avatar's massive form rose to meet the Harbinger, its golden glow physically pushing back against the encroaching gray of the unmaking aura. The conceptual decay halted. The fraying of memories stopped. Inside the avatar's protective chakra, the captains felt their strength return. This is it. Naruto's voice boomed from the avatar's chest. Rukia, get ready. Everyone else, clear the way. The Kurama avatar, with Rukia riding safely on its massive shoulder, began to ascend, a golden sun rising to meet the descending darkness. The Harbinger, for the first time, seemed to react. The void of its head tilted down, its full, silent attention now focused on this single, defiant point of brilliant light. The sky above them was no longer just cracked. The Dongai was pouring through, the laws of time and space breaking down completely. The world around the Seraite was dissolving into a chaotic, rushing sea. The city had become the last bastion of reality. A tiny island in an ocean of encroaching nothingness. The captains moved as one. They unleashed their Bankai again, but this time, not at the Harbinger. They fired at the encroaching chaos, at the waves of spatial distortion, creating a corridor for Naruto and Rukia's ascent. Their power was no longer the main event, it was the supporting fire for the final, desperate charge. As they rose higher and higher, leaving the battered city below, Rukia looked down at the captains, at her brother, all of them fighting a hopeless battle to buy her a few precious seconds. Then she looked at the silent, black silhouette ahead, the god of nothingness waiting for them. She felt a tremor of fear, a deep, primal terror that threatened to overwhelm her. She gripped the hilt of Soda no Shirayuki, its familiar cold a steadying presence. She felt Naruto's unwavering, golden energy all around her, a shield against the fear. She remembered his words in the garden, his hand on hers. She remembered her brother's plea. Do not die. Her fear did not vanish. It crystallized. It sharpened into a single, perfect point of resolve. She was Rukia Kuchiki, a lieutenant of the Gotei 13. She would not fail. They reached the apex. The golden fox avatar and the man-shaped hole in reality hovered opposite each other, the last two principles of the universe, creation and annihilation, poised for their final confrontation. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Promise of an Unwritten Sky. The universe was holding its breath. Below, on the last small island of reality called the Seraite, the Capt. Ains of the Gotei 13 fought a battle they could not win. They threw their Bankai not as weapons of victory, but as desperate, defiant gestures against the encroaching chaos of the Dongai, each blast fire or ice a scream into the void that said, "We are still here." They were buying seconds, paying for them with the last dregs of their spiritual power, their blood, and their souls. High above, in the silent epicenter of the apocalypse, the confrontation had reached its apex. The Kurama Avatar, a towering god form of pure, golden life, stood as a living dam against a silent, descending ocean of nothingness. Inside its blazing, protective shell, Naruto stood with Rukia, the warmth of his chakra a stark contrast to the conceptual cold pressing in from outside. "I can't hold it forever, Rukia," Naruto's voice boomed, echoing within the Avatar's mind. "It's not attacking. It's just erasing. It's pulling on the very idea of existence. I can anchor us, but I can't push it back." Rukia stared at the Harbinger, the featureless, man-shaped hole in the world. Its presence was a psychic grinding stone, wearing down her resolve, whispering to the deepest parts of her soul that she was small, temporary, and meaningless. That her struggles, her love, her very name, were just fleeting sparks that would soon be extinguished. "My Bankai, Haka no to game, it won't be enough," she said, her voice tight with the strain of resisting that existential dread. "It freezes matter. That thing isn't made of matter. You're thinking like a Shinigami," Naruto's voice cut through her fear, sharp and clear. "You're thinking of it as a technique, a series of steps. But your power isn't a sword, Rukia. It's a part of your soul. Its true nature isn't ice. It's stillness. The Harbinger's power is the verb, to unmake. Yours is the verb, to be still." He turned to her then, his true form visible within the golden chakra, and his blue eyes were blazing with a terrifying, absolute trust. "You have to go beyond your Bankai. Don't just release a wave of cold. Become the concept itself. I'll pour my energy into you, not to change your power, but to give you a stable anchor to hold onto. Use me as your tether to reality, and reach deeper. Don't freeze the Harbinger. Freeze its purpose." For just 1 second, it was the most insane thing she had ever heard. He was asking her to perform a miracle, to weaponize a philosophy. He was asking her to become a conceptual god herself, if only for a moment. The slightest misstep, the smallest lapse in concentration, and she wouldn't just fail, her soul would be utterly annihilated by the forces she was trying to command. She looked down at her blade, at the pure white ribbon on Sota no Shirayuki's hilt. She thought of her brother, sacrificing his body for her. She thought of the captains below, sacrificing their lives for her. She looked at Naruto, his face grim with exhaustion but his eyes filled with an unwavering belief in her that she had never even had in herself. He had held her world together. Now it was her turn. "All right," she breathed, the word a tiny point of defiance in the face of the void. "I'm ready." She raised her blade. She closed her eyes. She didn't shout an incantation. She fell inward, past the katas and the training, past the fear and the doubt, searching for the core truth of her own soul. Naruto placed a hand on her back, and a torrent of warm, golden life energy flooded into her, not overwhelming her Ryutsu, but supporting it, building a firewall of pure existence around her consciousness. "It wants you to believe you are nothing." Naruto's voice echoed in her mind, a guiding light in the darkness. "Prove it wrong." She felt the Harbinger's presence then, not as an external force, but as an insidious whisper inside her own thoughts. "You are a collection of fleeting memories. Your love is a chemical reaction. Your duty is a social construct. Let go. It is so much easier to not exist." No. The word was her own, a silent, internal roar. She remembered the taste of cheap sweets in the Rukin district with Renji. The weight of her sister Hasana's hand in hers. The infuriating, beautiful arrogance in her brother's eyes. The quiet warmth of Naruto's hand covering her own in a moonlit garden. These were not fleeting sparks. They were real. They were the pillars of her existence. Her spiritual pressure began to change. The biting, arctic cold of her Bankai receded, replaced by something far more profound. It was a perfect, absolute stillness. The very particles of reishi around her stopped vibrating. The golden chakra of the Kurama avatar, a maelstrom of life, became placid and smooth where it touched her. Bankai, she whispered, but the word was different now. It was not a command. It was a definition of her own being. She opened her eyes, and they were no longer violet. They were the pure, depthless white of a frozen world. She raised her blade, and from its tip, a wave of stillness expanded outwards. It was not white. It was not cold. It was the absence of all properties. A zone of perfect, conceptual zero. The harbinger, the god of nothingness, was caught in the wave. And for the first time, its unmaking aura faltered. The very concept of its purpose, the verb, to unmake, was being brought to a halt. It was frozen, trapped, a paradox held in a state of absolute stasis. For one perfect, silent second. Now, Naruto, she screamed, the effort of maintaining the zone already threatening to tear her soul apart. Naruto didn't need to be told. The moment her power washed over the harbinger, he moved. The Kurama avatar around him roared, not in rage, but in a final, defiant cry of creation. He wasn't forming a Bijudama. Destruction was the enemy's language, and he refused to speak it. His hands flew through a series of complex signs, a fusion of his own world's arts and the Kido theory he had learned from Kenshin. Swirling around his palms was not a sphere of chaotic energy, but an intricate golden lattice of light. It was a three-dimensional seal, a living equation that pulsed with an undeniable truth. It was the ultimate fuinjutsu of the Uzumaki clan, a technique designed not to destroy, but to contain. He had infused it with the purest form of his life energy, with the very concept of existence itself. He was going to defeat the god of nothingness not by erasing it, but by defining it. By giving it a boundary, by imprisoning it within the one thing it could not comprehend, being. With a final, universe-shaking roar, he thrust his hands forward. The golden seal shot from his palms. A spear of pure reality. The harbinger, still trapped in Rukia's absolute stasis, could not unmake it. Its passive defense was frozen. The seal struck its silent, black core. There was no explosion, no sound, no cataclysm. Instead, the harbinger's form began to change. The perfect, light-devouring black was filled with the golden, geometric lines of the seal. It was as if Song E1 had drawn a constellation inside a hole in space. The being of nothingness had been given a form, a structure, a definition. And it could not bear it. With a silent, final implosion, the harbinger's form collapsed in on itself. It did not scatter. It condensed, pulled inward by the powerful, defining logic of the seal, until the god of the void was reduced to a single, infinitesimally small point of brilliant golden light. And then, with a soft, final wink, it vanished. Sealed, contained, imprisoned for eternity within the very concept it sought to erase. The battle was over. The effect was instantaneous. The malevolent pressure on reality lifted. The psychic shriek that had echoed in every soul fell silent. The chaotic, rushing sea of the Dongai stopped its advance and began to recede, pouring back into the fissure in the sky like water down a drain. With a final, shuddering groan, the crack healed itself, leaving behind the calm, familiar blue of the Soul Society's sky. The world was saved, but salvation had a price. The moment the harbinger vanished, Rukia's transcendent state shattered. The power left her, and the backlash was catastrophic. A scream of pure agony was torn from her lips as her spirit, pushed far beyond its limits, threatened to fly apart. She collapsed, her consciousness fading into blackness. At the same time, the Kurama avatar dissolved into a shower of golden particles. Naruto, his own life force almost completely spent from anchoring reality, powering Rukia, and forging the ultimate seal, fell from the sky, a limp, plummeting form. They were falling from the heavens. 2 spent stars plummeting back to the broken earth they had just saved. They never hit the ground. A flicker of black and a blur of pink and white intercepted them. Shunsui Kyoraku, his face grim and bloody, caught Rukia, and Rukia Kuchiki, his body screaming in protest, using the last of his strength in a single, desperate burst of shunpo, caught Naruto. Weeks later, Sun rose over a seraite that was scarred but healing. The physical damage was immense, but the psychological and political damage was far greater, and far more cleansing. The great lie was dead. E-corrupt members of Central 46 had been exposed and removed. The Gotei 13, humbled and stripped of their comfortable dogma, were rebuilding not just their city, but their entire society, on a new foundation of difficult truth. Kenshin Araki, no longer a rigid traditionalist but a pragmatic and respected voice of reason, now sat on the new Reform Council. Kenpachi Zaraki had found his ultimate battle and, having survived it, was now disturbingly content. And Rukia Kuchiki, his wound now slowly, truly healing under Captain Unohana's care, was learning to rule his clan not just with law, but with heart. The world had been irrevocably changed. In the Kuchiki Manor Garden, where the camellias were once again blooming, Naruto sat on the Ingawa, watching the koi in the pond. He was no longer a blazing sun of power. Much of his vast energy had been permanently expended in the final battle, poured into the seal that now held a dead god captive. He was still powerful, immensely so, but the overwhelming, world-breaking aura was gone. He felt lighter, more human. The shoji screen slid open, and Rukia stepped out. She was dressed not in her Shinigami uniform, but in a simple, elegant kimono. She moved with a quiet grace. The terrifying power she had wielded now settled deep within her, a calm, confident core. She sat beside him, and the silence between them was not empty, but full of everything they had endured. "They offered me a promotion," she said, her voice soft. "Captain of the 13th Division. Yukitaki is stepping down to a teaching role. He says his health can't keep up with the new era." Naruto smiled. "You'll be a great captain." "I said I needed time to think," she continued, looking at her hands. "They also made you an offer. A permanent position. Captain Commander of a new, independent division focused on interdimensional threats. Your own command, your own laws." He nodded. "I know. I turned it down." She looked at him, surprised. "Why? It's everything you could ask for. A purpose." He turned to her, his blue eyes clear and calm. "I fought a war to save my world, and they called me a hero. I fought a god to save your world, and they want to call me a commander. But I'm tired of being a symbol. I spent my whole life looking for a grand purpose." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I think I was looking for the wrong thing." His hand found hers, their fingers lacing together in a familiar, comfortable grip. "My purpose isn't saving the world anymore, Rukia. It's seeing you smile. It's arguing with Renji over dinner. It's helping your brother learn how to be a person again. It's being here, for the sunrise." Her eyes shimmered, and a smile, bright and genuine, spread across her face. "That's a much better purpose." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, gentle kiss that held no desperation, only the quiet certainty of a shared future. It was a promise made not in the face of annihilation, but in the calm, hopeful light of a new day. They parted, but they didn't let go of each other's hands. They sat together, side by side, and watched as the golden rays of the morning sun crested the walls of the Seraite, washing over the broken but healing city. The sky above was a vast, clear, brilliant blue, empty of gods and monsters. It was a blank page, waiting for a new story to be written. And they would write it together. Chapter 10 End.